nasceu numa colaboração, como foi dito, com outras 4 fundações europeias no âmbito da Network of European Foundations. A Fundação, no âmbito das suas atividades no desenvolvimento humano, tem procurado encontrar ferramentas inovadoras que melhor respondam às necessidades sociais, e este jogo é exemplo disso, porque é uma ferramenta nova e uma utilização diferente dos jogos num contexto pedagógico, mas que chama a atenção para um assunto relevante da nossa sociedade, que é a questão da pobreza e da exclusão social. A Fundação apoiou o seu desenvolvimento e está agora empenhado na melhor disseminação do jogo, e daí foi com muita naturalidade e com muito entusiasmo que nos associámos à DGIDC, a quem desde já agradecemos pelo empenho e por todo o entusiasmo com que receberam e acolheram esta iniciativa. Associámos-nos também ao programa Escolhas, que também está hoje aqui connosco, e que também agradeço a forma entusiasta com que receberam. Esta sessão para nós é muito importante porque efetivamente marca o início desta nova fase do projeto, porque efetivamente o jogo não faz sentido ter sido desenvolvido se não for utilizado, e os senhores serão essas pontes de ligação e de disseminação. Por isso também vos agradeço a todos. Queria também deixar uma palavra ao Jan e à Caroline. Jan, thank you so much for joining us and provide us this training session. I'm sure it will be a success. And Caroline, I don't know. Oh, here you are. Thank you so much also for joining us. Muito obrigado.
Good morning, everyone. I guess. Oh, sorry. Oh, no problem.
Sorry. Bom dia. Eu sou a Teresa, Pombo, faço parte da equipa de recursos e tecnologias educativas. Isto é um bocado discursivo, mas pronto. Faço parte da equipa de recursos e tecnologias educativas. Queria agradecer-vos todos terem vindo. Eu sei que é uma altura muito complicada. Na sala, só para terem uma ideia, nós vamos ter, se vierem todos, a maior parte de professores com o perfil que nós achámos que era mais adequado para a utilização deste jogo. Temos também formadores da área das tecnologias e temos os nossos, não estão todos infelizmente, mas estão os nossos parceiros dos centros de competência TIC, que depois nos irão ajudar a fazer a disseminação do jogo. Este workshop é precisamente o ponto de partida para essa disseminação. Nós pedimos desculpa por estar a realizar-se nesta altura, sabemos que é uma altura complicada, mas seja como for, a sala está bonita. Qual é o nosso objetivo? Eu penso que o Luís da Gulbenkian já disse um bocadinho, mas basicamente é aproveitar um recurso que nós consideramos muito bom, quer do ponto de vista técnico, mas sobretudo do ponto de vista educativo, e quando eu falo de recurso, não falo do jogo só em si, mas falo do manual para professores, que é esse livro laranja que tem nas vossas pastas, que já está traduzido em português, que vai ser distribuído às escolas com terceiro ciclo e ensino secundário, que nós acabamos de publicar na internet, ou seja, já a versão digital já está disponível para as pessoas saberem o que é, onde é que se encontra o jogo, como é que o utilizam. E pensámos então pegar num grupo de professores que poderiam então utilizar o jogo com os seus alunos. A Caroline disse-me que nós estamos a ser pioneiros, ou seja, Portugal, mais uma vez, de todos os países em que o jogo existe, é o primeiro país que está a fazer uma iniciativa deste género. E, neste momento, eu tenho a base de dados com todos os inscritos. O que é que vai acontecer, ou o que é que nós pretendemos que aconteça? Primeiro, tentar replicar um bocadinho deste workshop em setembro, por isso é que ele está a ser gravado, e nisso os centros de competência vão ter um papel bastante importante, e depois conseguir que os professores que estiverem aqui hoje e que venham a utilizar, de facto, o jogo com os seus alunos, partilhem as experiências. Pronto. Significa que eu vou divulgar, não hoje, mas depois divulgo para os vossos mails e divulgo também no nosso site, um módulo que entretanto decidimos que vai ser aberto, onde as pessoas vão poder, quer as pessoas que aqui estão, quer os outros professores que quiserem, vão poder partilhar o que é, no fundo, ou o que é que tem sido utilizar o PINC. Eu acho que toda a gente é unânime ao considerar que, face à crise, refletir sobre a pobreza, não só nos países em desenvolvimento, mas também nos países desenvolvidos, acho que é importante. E O jogo tem uma série de potencialidades, não só na geografia, onde há uma unidade sobre a pobreza, não só na formação cívica, mas dei por mim a pensar, e estão aqui alguns colegas de inglês, pelo menos o José Moura está ali, mas dei por mim a pensar que o próprio ambiente imersivo, não é, do jogo em inglês ou em espanhol pode ser uma boa oportunidade de aprendizagem. Por isso eu espero que seja de vosso agrado, vai correr tudo bem de certeza. Relativamente ao almoço, desculpem que eu estou preocupada com isto, nós só temos 1 hora, eu não vos indiquei restaurantes porque de facto aqui à volta, quer na rua de cima, quer atravessando para o outro lado, tem imensos restaurantes ou pastelarias com mini pratos. Era impossível assegurarmos nós aqui para 50 pessoas, por isso tentarmos mais ou menos respeitar os horários seria ótimo, está bem? Nós também vamos fazer um esforço, está bom? Obrigadíssimo, boa tarde e bom trabalho. Have a nice work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't think... Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah, I think the mic's on. Right, good. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give this presentation in English. I was just wondering if anyone, other people in this room whose French is actually better than their English. Are there any people? No, it's English. English is easier. Okay, it's easier for me as well, but otherwise I could sometimes translate a bit. But anyway, we'll do it in English. My name is Jan Van Looy. I am a researcher in Belgium, in Ghent, more particularly, and my specialization is gaming research. So we do all kinds of research into gaming, also, well, who games, why, when, which games, and all that kind of research, but also we also do experience research, which means like you have a game, which is basically something that tries to evoke an experience in the user. You want to sort of create emotion in the user, and what we do research into how this happens and how we can use this, for example, in a game like this for learning. So that's the kind of research we do. The presentation I will be giving today is partly my own, so I'm Jan Van Looy, but also there's also some research we did with the game in classrooms, and that was carried out by Frederik de Grove, who's my colleague, who's a junior researcher. And then there's Wim Wouters from Grin Multimedia, and they are the developers of the game. So we did not develop Ping. We are actually a user experience lab. So what we do is we try to understand the user of the game, and we try to improve the game by listening to users and measuring different elements of their experience. So what will I be talking about today? Serious games and the pleasure of learning. That's basically the essence, I think. If learning could be fun, everyone would learn automatically. That would be good. But more specifically, this presentation will be quite specific about Ping. Later on, you'll hear a lot more about also use of other games in school. But this presentation will be about Ping, and more particularly it will be about the why and how of a serious game about poverty and social exclusion. So how did we come up with this idea? Why did we make this game? First of all, how did we get to the idea of making a game about poverty? Well, I guess now it's about 1.5 to 2 years ago, the European Commission announced that 2010 would be the European year for combating poverty and social exclusion. And they put forward a number of objectives that should be reached during that year. And for example, one was that we should recognize the right of people living in poverty and exclusion to a dignified existence and a valuable role in society. Another objective was to increase the number of policy initiatives, and then with emphasis on the responsibility we all share. So they wanted to make people feel responsible also for other people in poverty. Another objective was a more integrated society in which no one doubts that society as a whole stands to benefit from the eradication of poverty. So society as a whole should know that poverty, that eradicating, removing poverty is a good thing for society. And then finally, a fourth objective, a commitment from all actors, because real progress demands a sustained effort at all levels of society. Right? So these were some objectives put forward by the European Commission, and we started thinking about that. As you see, I underlined a few words in it, and actually there's a call for making people aware of poverty and making people feel responsible for people in poverty. And then there's also the fact that they demand a sustained effort at all levels of society. So not just in the ivory tower or in policy circles, they want everyone to know about poverty, the problems they cause, and so on. So we started thinking about that. How can we raise awareness about poverty? And then of course you think, well, who should we raise awareness with? I mean, of course, you can try to raise awareness in everyone, but at the same time, but that's of course difficult. So we started thinking, okay, who will be tomorrow's poverty fighters? That will be young people. So what we wanted to do was raise awareness in young people. So that was the starting point of this project. So how do you reach out to young people? If you want to reach out to young people, you have to speak their language. You have to do something they feel acquainted with, something they like, and that's how we said, okay, what is today a very, very powerful tool that young people are aware of, that they are used to? Well, it's games. I mean, in Western Europe, for example, but I'll have some statistics on that later on, I think. But about 80% of teenagers plays a game every now and then. That can be on their mobile phone, that can be on the internet, or on their console. But it's a very powerful new medium. And then there's, of course, we do not want to make just a game. Not just a game for entertainment, because most games you see are made or built to be fun, and just that. They just want to entertain the player. But then there are also more and more games that can also be fun, but they are not just built to create fun. They can also be used at the same time to do something else. And that's what a serious game is. It's a bit of an awkward name, I think. Someone started it and it sort of stuck. Serious game, because I think entertainment can be very serious as well. If you look at a gamer playing, he's very serious. But anyway, it's the term mostly used for games that are not just for entertainment, but for example for training, or for education, or for raising awareness. So anything that is not just entertainment. So why are these games used? There are several reasons, but for example in training they can be used because it's cheaper. I mean, if imagine that you have to learn to fly an airplane, of course it's cheaper and safer to do that on a computer first, right? So that's one possibility why you would use a simulation or a simulation game. But there are other examples. For example, if you want to train firefighters, right? You do not want to burn a building every time you want to help to teach people how to extinguish a fire, right? So You can do that in a game. You can teach people how to work together and things like that. So that's some examples of possible applications of serious games. So why a serious game about poverty? That's the next question. Well, there are several reasons to do it. First of all, as I said, gaming is an increasingly popular pastime. It's the fastest growing entertainment industry. It's the fastest growing medium in terms of pastime spent by young people. And so as I said, about 80% of Western teenagers play a game every now and then. There's also, gaming is also a medium that is gaining cultural clout. What does that mean? I mean, say 10 years ago, nobody took games seriously. I mean, games were just that thing that teenage boys played somewhere in the dark in their room, and nobody took it seriously. It was not culture, certainly not art. It was something far away from all that. But from that niche, it's started moving towards mainstream media. I mean, for example, of course, some of you will have seen Avatar, the movie. Is for example, a movie that was very strongly influenced by the idea of gaming, whereby Avatar is a term that comes from online games. So, and there are other examples, but more and more, well, it always happens like that. When a medium arrives, it's always it's not in the mainstream. It's somewhere. It's far outside the media mainstream, and then it slowly moves towards the center. And games have been doing that in the past 10 years. So they've become more and more important, and they are really starting to be accepted as part of our culture. Of course, there's also the industry. I mean, building a computer game, one that you would buy in a store, right, on a DVD, like a contemporary, really high level, I don't know, for PlayStation or something, would easily cost 10 million euros to build, just to give you an idea. 10 million euros. That's almost as much as Hollywood blockbusters. So it's a gigantic industry, and it's actually past music in terms of turnover. So the game industry is really a very, very important entertainment industry today. And then finally, there's also the coolness factor, right? I mean, youngsters, because we were talking about why a game about poverty, we want to talk to young people. Well, games are cool, right? I mean, you have the parents, they don't know nothing about games, but then you have the teenagers, and they have their games, and nobody else understands them, but it's really their thing. It's a bit like rock and roll music in the 60s, like parents don't understand it, but youngsters do. So it's their language, their medium. So what we wanted to do was to reach out to teenagers through their medium and their language, and also their way of thinking. A second slide about why a serious game about poverty. Well, it's about the educational potential. This is the idea of intrinsic motivation, it's very often called. What does intrinsic motivation mean? That the activity of playing itself motivates you. Very, very simply put, somebody who likes a game will keep on playing the game. Why? Because they like the game. Nothing else. You do not have to give them sweets. You do not have to give them marks. They will just keep on playing. That's the idea of intrinsic motivation. So imagine if we could make if we could use this phenomenon of intrinsic motivation to do other things. I mean, of course you can provide fun that way, but what if you could use that intrinsic motivation, for example, for learning, right? So the premise is you like to play. That's an important one, though. I mean, if you make games that are no fun, the premise disappears and the rest of the logic will not work, right? So you need to, the game needs to be fun. But if the game is fun, you want to play on. You want to progress, to make progress in the game. So if you want to make progress, if it's a learning game, you'll need to learn. So basically, you learn just to be able to play. And that's the idea of intrinsic motivation. No external rewards are needed. And then there's a third reason why we could use, or why we thought we should use a game about gaming as a medium to tackle poverty, and it's because of their rhetorical power. But it's sometimes also called meaningful play. So first of all, there are several reasons why games can be very strong rhetorically. There's a lot of thinking about medium specificity. For example, books are good at some things, films are good at other things, but games are also good at some things, at representing some phenomena. And why is that so? Because first of all, they are very hands-on. When you play a game, you literally have your hands on the medium. You have to do something, right? They're interactive. You cannot lose your mind or just start thinking about other things. You have to stay close to what you're doing. Otherwise, nothing happens. So that's one very typical thing about gaming. A second thing is a self-role. When you play a game, you get a role in the medium itself. I mean, just think about reading a book, for example, right? You basically follow someone else's actions, right? You do not feel like you are doing the actions. For example, sometimes you even have books that are written in the I form, right? I went that way, and then that happened, and then I went there. But even then, afterwards, after reading the book, you wouldn't say, I did this or I did that in the book, right? But when you're playing a game, you actually get a role inside the medium. So, for example, very often you'll hear gamers that are playing, they will say, oh, I'm going into the cave or something. They say I, right? So it's a sort of a mental thing that you project yourself into the medium. And that's something that is very particular to games. And then finally, games are very good at presenting systemic things. What does that mean? Things that consist of a system. Why is that? Because, of course, games are a system themselves. They consist of numbers, right? Everything you'll see today, ping, it's one big number crunching machine. It's all numbers. Everything you see, the visuals, the interaction, it's all numbers. So what are these systems, these number simulations good at? Of course, at representing other systems. And of course, poverty is not entirely, but partly a systemic thing, right? So you have a lot of variables, a lot of factors that influence each other. For example, okay, the most obvious one is you don't have any money. And then, but that's not the only one. But because as time passes, you, for example, do not get a good education, which is again a systemic problem. You do not get a good education, so you do not get a good job. You do not get a good job, so you do not earn a lot of money. You do not have enough money, so your health is not very good. And You see, it's all things that are interrelated. It's really a systemic, it's a system whereby a lot of variables influence each other. So that was the third reason why we said we have to do this through a game. So poverty and social exclusion are experiential. You have to, oh yeah, that's important also. So it's not just a systemic thing, but we also wanted to, this is not really, actually Ping is not really a learning game. You do not learn that much about poverty, but you experience some elements of poverty. So it was really meant to, not to teach people, to teach teenagers which percentage of the public is poor or something. No, we wanted to place them in the role of someone who experiences social exclusion and poverty. So, and then, of course, these two are very important. You get hands-on, you can move your character in the virtual world, and that character with which you can identify yourself with, that character experiences poverty and social exclusion. So finally, we arrive at the game itself. Well, a description of it anyway. So this is what we came up with as a game concept. So what we did was, we wanted to create an online adventure game. An adventure game, I'm not sure if it's a certain genre, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the genre, but typically an adventure game is a game in which you basically have to walk around and solve puzzles, and as you also talk to people, and they will help you, they will give you advice, and then you go somewhere else. And that's typically an adventure game. It's a genre that also is in commercial games, although it has become less popular today because it's not very action-oriented. It's more story-oriented. And it's an online adventure game about two teenagers who experience misfortune. Two teenagers, one is called Jim, the other is called Sophia. Of course, we chose a boy and a girl because research has shown that, for example, boys will tend to choose the boy. Girls will even more strongly tend to choose the girl. And when they choose a character of their own gender, they will identify mentally, they will identify more strongly with that character. And also the messages that are in the game will also be processed and experienced more strongly when they can do that. And actually these two characters both have a different background story. So Jim is someone who doesn't fit in at home. He has problems with his parents and he decides to run away. So he sells his bike and he goes to the city. And then the game starts and then you play Jim. Sophia, on the other hand, it's a different type of poverty. It's not something particular that happens, it's more generational poverty. So she's already from a very poor background and she has to take care of her grandmother. But at one point her grandmother gets so ill that the grandmother has to go to a home for the elderly. And then all of a sudden Sophia finds herself alone in the city and she has to take care of herself. So you have two stories, and at the beginning of the game you choose one or the other. So of course they do take place in the same city, so they will interact every now and then. But basically when you choose Sophia, you can play the entire game as Sophia and then end the game. right? But then you can play the game again as Jim, for example. So it's not that you switch between characters during the game. So very, very important, we thought, was to make a fun game. As I said, you need that as a premise. If it's not fun, the entire idea of using games in education will not work. So, in fact, to a certain extent, the pleasure part is even more important or more basic than the education part, right? And then what we wanted to do is also represent systemic exclusion. We also talked to people who have experienced poverty. They've also tested the game, by the way, as it was being developed. And one of the things they liked a lot about the game was that it created some frustration, strangely enough. So as you're playing, you experience a sort of, you get frustrated because people who are in poverty very often, they are very much occupied with being poor. Sometimes people who have it well say like, okay, why don't they do that? Or why don't they do that? But actually they're just trying to survive and they are trying to find their way in society. And everything takes a lot longer for them and is more complex. And it's also that kind of systemic exclusion that we wanted to put into the game. The problems that poor people actually face when they are trying to build up a life. For example, one of the things is that bureaucracy is a great frustration of people in social exclusion. So we put that in there. So the general goal was to have young people learn how it is to be poor, but in a stimulating, hands-on manner and with a positive undertone. That's very important as well, because of course, poverty is also a very heavy issue. I mean, it's a very, you can present very negative, you can present it in a very negative light, right? It's got a lot of ugly faces, say drugs, crime, things like that. We decided not to do that. We decided not to present it that way because we did not necessarily want to provide an exact image of what poverty, of all of the faces poverty can take. We just wanted to get youngsters to experience what it is to be poor, and then you can present all those other elements in a lesson or in a course, or you do not necessarily have to put everything in the game. We wanted to provide a positive message. Also, when you build a game, you want to add a positive ending, a sort of a victory state. Because if you do not have a goal in a game, a sort of positive thing to work towards, the game won't function either. And then, of course, the question was, what is actually a victory condition of people who are in poverty? That was an interesting question, and that's also why we worked with people in poverty, because is their dream actually to have a Rolls Royce in front of their villa? Of course it wasn't. When we talked to people in poverty, they said they do not want to be rich, actually. Most of them, they just want to lead a normal life. And so, as you'll notice, maybe I shouldn't have said that. The victory condition of this game is actually just to get your life organized and have a basis to be happy. Now some results, because as I said, building a game like that, you cannot do that in isolation. You cannot just go to a game designer, say build a game about poverty, and then 1 year later you have a game about poverty. That's not how it works. You need a lot of other players involved. So for example, as I said, we did tests with people who experienced social exclusion and poverty, but also we worked with teachers who tested the game because they wanted to, or we wanted to be sure that they could use it in their classes. And then finally, a very important part, we tested with pupils or students, of course, because again, if it's no fun, it won't work. So what we did was, during an entire year, because the development of the game took about a year, we did testing. So there was alpha, beta, and release candidates. So these are different development stages. And each time we did tests in schools. So in all, there were about 400 pupils who tested the game. I think in about 25 classes. And it was actually one of my students, Frederick de Hoeve, who did that during his master's thesis. A brilliant master's thesis, by the way. He got an award for that. And what did we do? As we wanted to find out if the game was fun, we used game experience measurements. These are actually tools for measuring game experience, but commercial games. And they hadn't been used on serious games yet, but we did. So we used, these are like scales with different dimensions, like challenge, immersions, that kind of stuff. And we used it, and we tested it with the students. So we asked them if they were immersed and all that. And then another one we tested was perceived learning. So we did not measure actual learning, because it's very difficult to measure actual learning for a game like Ping, because it's all about raising awareness. It's not actually about, say, learning to complete equations in mathematics or something. That you can easily measure, but this is more of an attitude. Do you learn? How do you feel towards poverty? So what we did develop was a perceived learning measurement. So what we asked the students was, did you feel like you learned about poverty? For example, also, if another question would be, if you were a mayor of a city now, would you know better what you would have to do to reduce poverty in your city? Things like that. So that's the perceived learning measurement. And each time we had students test the game, and then afterwards they would fill in a questionnaire where we would measure these factors. And interestingly, we got highly positive results. So there was a high fun factor to the game. Of course, I should say more about this. Of course, partly they just liked playing the game because it was a game and it was in school, right? So it was a first. So I'm quite sure actually that at home the fun factor would actually be less. But just the context, because it was the first time they got to go to the IT class, and they could play the game. And just that also made or caused them to be very happy about it. And then also interesting was that there was a very strong effect of fun on perceived learning. So if they liked the game, they also had a much stronger feeling of having learned about poverty. But I have some more detailed results on all that. So all in all, in the statistical processing, we took 340 students. And yes, this is technical education and this is general education, because one of the big problems of building a game, again, is, especially a game that needs to be used in class, is that it needs to fit all the students. And students, I don't have to tell you that, they can be very different. You have girls, you have boys, you have gamers, you have non-gamers, you have all these different types of education, and we wanted to make something that would suit all of them. So one of the things we did for that was we made the movement very easy. You just have to click in the world and your character walks towards that point in the world. That was because non-gamers have difficulties with 3D worlds and moving around in 3D worlds. So we made it as easy as possible. Of course, from the gamers then, you get the reaction that, oh, I want to use my arrows and look around like they do in their first-person shooters. But, of course, you have to sort of find a middle ground between all those groups. But anyway, there are 40% were technical education and 60% were general education, 60% females, 40% males. These are convenience samples. We just contacted schools and that's what came up. So we didn't choose them or anything. Oh yeah, when about 80 of them played games every week, 40 of them each month, and so on. So about 56% plays video games on a regular basis. Only 14% never played games. These are some measurements we took. These are all experience dimensions. I could give you some information on them. For example, competence refers to the degree to which they felt competent at playing the game. So I was good at it. Vividness is about the graphics and the sounds. It all felt very vivid. Immersion means to what degree were you inside the game mentally? You were immersed in the game. Then challenge is to what extent were you challenged? Was it difficult? Then you have negative affect, which refers to just a sort of negative feeling. And then positive feeling, and then learning. We also measured learning. And what we see is, and now I can actually start using this thing, that positive affect, which is positive feeling, scored very high, 3.18, which is far above average. But even more interesting was this, 3.99, so 5 is maximum, right? So 3.99, and that's effective learning, and that's actually what the students said after playing. We want to do this more often. So effective learning is just the attitude towards using games in school. So they were very, very positive about that. This is probably less important today, but these are, we also compared, of course, the different design stages. You had alpha, beta, release candidate, and we wanted to know if the experience of the game would change, and it changed only for competence and challenge. So people actually, as the interface and the use of the game got better, they also felt more competent at playing the game. And then, are there differences between educational levels? So, no, it's not indicated. Anyway, yes. So this is technical education, and this is general education. As you can see, the students from general education liked it a little bit more than the students in technical education, right? But actually, the difference is quite small. So we were very happy about that. So both audiences liked to play the game. And then are there differences between male and female students? And this is an interesting one. Because, so the dark green ones are female, and the longer ones are male. The light green ones are male. And for example, for competence, you can see that males actually felt more competent. They felt more like, they felt that they were better at playing the game. But then when we look at vividness, for example, girls found the 3D world much more vivid. they liked the graphics much more than boys. This is probably because they have less experience with games, but also it gets more interesting even. Negative affect, which is the sort of negative attitude, negative feeling after playing the game, there you see a really big difference. That actually boys are larger here, but that's of course because it's negative affect, and so they actually had more negative feelings towards the game than girls. So generally, and that's something we see here as well, positive affect and effective gaming, girls liked it better than boys to play ping in school. So that was an interesting observation. And then, are there differences between gamers and non-gamers? There were some minor differences, but quite logical ones. So, gamers felt more competent at playing the game, which is, of course, logical. And then they also felt more positive towards the game, and they also felt slightly more positive towards playing games in school, using games in school. So, conclusion of our research. So very good, very positive reception of ping, and a very positive attitude towards using games in school by students. There were some differences between the different populations of students, but they were actually negligible, so we were very happy about that. And two other things. There was very little change between the different design stages, but that was probably because actually the alpha stage was also already quite complete, so it was just in terms of content that was added later, so that's why these differed less. And this is follow-up research we're doing now. For example, we're now talking to teachers. That's something I would be very much interested in later on as well, is to hear your opinion, what the problems are about using these kinds of games in school. But that's for later. So what I would propose now is that I go to the website and show you around there. Has anyone visited the website already? That's a minority, but I'm not sure. Does everyone have access to internet here or not? Yes, you do. Okay. So if you like, you can follow the same path as I do. So the web address is www.povertyisnotagame.com. Should be easy enough. Of course, the website, we tried to get ping.com, but then Apple decided to release a platform that was called Ping, so we couldn't get that one. But we were first. As you can see, both game and manual have been released in several languages already, and also in Portuguese. So you can just follow the same path as I do, but in Portuguese. Normally the website should be entirely the same. First of all, at the starting page, you get some introductory information. And maybe it's useful to quickly show the trailer that's on there, which was quite well made, I think, and which was
opportunity to allow young people to learn about
Okay, I'm
poverty.
going to start this again.
Whereas for the European Anti-Poverty Network, poverty is not a game. For the European Anti-Poverty Network, poverty is not a game. So this is the opportunity
Can you turn it up a bit?
allow young people to learn about poverty, whereas often it's not a subject that they think about. It's certainly not a subject that's taught in schools. So it's an opportunity for them to learn it in a way that's accessible to them. A lot of them spend a lot of time on games, on computer games, and this is why this is rather unusual. It's a serious game, and yet apparently it's one that they enjoy.
A serious game is a game that is not built primarily for entertainment purposes, but rather with other goals in mind, such as education, but also to raise awareness about social problems. There are two scenarios. Either you play Jim or Sophia. Jim ran away from home because he fell out with his parents, and Sophia is a poor girl whose grandmother has to go to a home, so she has to take care of herself. The game was tested in over 20 classes with 400 pupils, and it was very positively received. What was interesting was that both boys and girls liked it a lot, and both technical education pupils and general education. And what was also interesting was that people who liked the game a lot, that they also learned more from it.
Ik vind het een heel leuk idee om een spel in een klas te integreren. Het is een keer een andere werkvorm en ze zijn toch nog bezig met het thema, dus hier het thema armoede, wat ook in de lessen aan bod komt.
Je moet wel veel opdrachten doen, bijvoorbeeld naar de directeur gaan en voor je job te werken en met je zus praten en kijken waar je moet logeren. Maar het is wel een leuk spel.
We wanted to make sure that the game was going to contribute to the debate on the use of serious game in educational setting. For that, we ally with two partners. On the one hand, the Anti-Poverty Network, to make sure that the content on poverty was properly displayed, just to avoid stigmatization or the use of clichés, so that was important. On the other hand, we also work with European Schoolnet to make sure that we take on board the teachers that are very instrumental in the outreach to the young people, and they will have with them a toolkit that is going to accompany their discussion on poverty in the classrooms and everything.
Ik heb de eerste printversie van de handleiding gezien en ik denk dat de leerkrachten daar heel blij mee gaan zijn, want alle leerplandoelstellingen en alle voeten staan er al in, dus dat is voor de leerkracht heel gemakkelijk.
The teacher's book draws a lot on the material that comes from EAPN, and our material is based on experiences of people on the ground experiencing poverty. So this is a direct link with the project, and we were very happy to contribute content to the background material for the use of this game.
Right, there's... Can I get sound again? Can I get sound again? I guess I do have sound again. Okay. So this is the trailer. There's another short movie about the conference where it was launched in Brussels. You can look on, you can look into that if you have time. So there are several parts to the website. You have, of course, home, where we are now, and then you have play the game. We'll go to that later on. Then there's for teachers. You have all received today a manual, which was actually largely made by the next speaker. But it can also be found online, so if you do not have enough copies or anything, or if you want to send it to someone, so you can actually download the manual here. It's in PDF, so that should be easy enough. There's also some press material, some questions. So sometimes people have problems, also technical problems. You can get more information there. And then there's play the game. There are two ways to play the game, and both have their advantage. First way to play the game is to play it in your browser, right? Is the one that I will be showing now. And the advantage is that you can go very fast online and you do not have to put any software on the computer. That is to say, you do have to install the Unity plugin, which is a very safe 3D plugin. It's something like Flash. Many people know Flash plugin. And it's actually the same, but for 3D graphics. So you have to install that. But on this computer, it was already done. And you can just click on Play Ping. Let's give this some time. By the way, the next presentation will go into the manual more deeply, so you'll get a lot of information there. I'm going to skip that now. I'll be focusing on the game, but no worries, you'll get more information later. Grin is the developer of the game. So there we are, and you can just play online. You can just go to the website and it should work. For example, if I click on Sophia. So the game starts with a short introductory story in the form of a comic, and then the game will start for real. I'm going to stop here because the second way of playing Ping, and that's often a more interesting way for teachers and for use in schools, is that you just download the game. Because you can play it in your browser, but you can also download it, and then you can just put it on a USB stick and just put it on all the computers in your class, and the students can just turn it on. How do you do that? You just go to Downloads, and you have Download Ping Game, which is 21 megabytes. It can take a while, but it should be okay if you're on broadband. And it's a zip file. You do not have to install the software. You just get a zip file, and you can just open the zip file and just drag it onto your computer. I don't know if I have to show that. So you just get a zip file, you open it, and of course the advantage is here, so the advantage of the online version is that it's quick, right? You can just go to the website, turn it on, and show it, as I did. This one takes a little bit more preparation, but the advantage is that many school networks have a very limited internet connection. And actually, if we did tests in schools, and you have, for example, a class with 20 students, and they all start Ping in their web browser, and all of a sudden, every computer asks the same information via the internet, right? So it enters really slowly. So it's very often it's more useful to just download the game, as I did here, and just put it on the computers. So I can just drag this, for example, to my desktop. There it is already, so it's quite quick. I can open it, and I do not have to install it. So if afterwards after playing the game, I do not have to uninstall the software, I can just delete the file, and that's it. There's no So this is, I just double-clicked the ping file and it's opening. This is quite an important screen, especially when using ping in a school context, because very often computers in schools are not very powerful, especially when it comes to 3D graphics. So it's probably best that you try the game on the computers first. And how can you do that? You have two variables here. You have screen resolution, which is the size of the screen you see. And the smaller you make it, the easier it is for the computer to play the game. So if you have really old computers, it's best to play, for example, in 640 times 480. And then there's also graphics quality, and that's quite logical as well. If you put that really fastest, that means not very good quality, but very easy on the computer. So it's probably best to test it first on the computers you will be using. I got quite a powerful machine here, so let's see what. Oh yeah, I'm going to put it on full screen. So if you want it on full screen, you can turn that off and then. Okay, now we get the sponsors again. For those that do not have their laptops with them, for this afternoon you'll have plenty of opportunity to test the game again. So then you'll also have more time to play, because I'll just be showing the controls and give a very quick demonstration. So this is the opening screen. So you have to choose a character with whom you want to play. I'm going to play with Sophia. We'll look into that later on, okay? It is quite a stable game. I mean, it works really on most hardware, most computers. Of course, it's only PC, but it's really it still has some bugs, but that's always like that. When you make games, people find ways of crashing the thing. But it's quite a stable game. Anyway, this is the introductory story to Sophia. And so her grandmother has to go to the home of the elderly, and there she goes. And just like that, Sophia was facing the city on her own. And then it ends with the phone is ringing. And then the game starts. Some information on using the game. You get the same information in the manual. So you can, in the English one at least, yes, there it is. So you can just look at page 31. But anyway, as I explained earlier, we made the navigation really easy. You just have to click somewhere and your character will move there. And then when you right-click, the camera will look in the direction of the character. Or you can drag to rotate the camera. I'll show you afterwards. You can enter buildings, but you have to click on the door to enter the building. When there's a small lock on the door, you cannot enter. And when there's this sign, the green arrow, you can enter. And then there's people you can talk to. You can talk to almost everyone, but not everyone has a lot to say. So you just click on the person, and then there will be a small icon like this, a talk icon. You press that, and then you can talk to the character. And then finally there's some stats. So you have a general happiness stat of the character, and then there's the money stats, and actually there's more to it, but I'll show you later. And then at the right corner you have a map of the city where you have to do different things. Could I have a little bit of sound? Okay. This is the beginning of the game. As the comic ended, she got a telephone call. So, hello, this is Sophia. So she's calling her sister, whose name is Jess. Hey, little one, this is Jess. Hey, sister, are you okay? Everything is fine here. Exams soon. So I'm working hard. Have you got time to meet up? Good plan. I've got a lot to tell you. I will be waiting at the football field. There you go. So now she knows that her sister will be at the football field. But how to get to the football field? Huh? Well, you have a map here. And the green dot, that's you. And there's also a direction. You can... Now I'm walking in that direction. Now I'm walking in that direction. So now I'm basically just clicking with my left mouse button, and the character goes that way. But of course now I cannot see where she's going. If I want to see where she's going, I just click on the right mouse button. And the camera, which actually floats behind her, will just turn around. And that's the basic navigation. And if you want to know where you have to go, you can just follow the yellow line here. So later on, you'll see that you can also take the bus. So there are different parts in the city. There's a nice neighborhood, there's an industrial neighborhood. There's someone there. You just click on the character, and then you click on the speak button, and then, hey Jess. Hi Sophia, what did you want to tell me? Grandma went to a nursing home. She had too much problems with her health, and I couldn't take care of her anymore. And how are you? I'll probably have to leave the house, and then we'll see. If you want to, you can stay at my place. That's Jess talking. You know it's not large and that I have to study, so it's only a temporary solution. Thanks, I will go to the social assistant first, see what she can do for me. Have you got an appointment? Yes, Grandma made the appointment for me. I'll go there now. I'll call you later. Okay, take care, sis. So now I go to the social assistant. And SID, and as I move my arrow over this door, I notice there's a green arrow so I can enter. There she is. Okay, let's... Good afternoon, can I help you? Yes, my grandma made an appointment. So you must be Sophia. Indeed. You okay? And then you get to choose your answer. Well, I've been better. We've checked your situation and we're sorry to say you won't be able to keep living in your grandma's house. That's what I was afraid of. Have you got any family you can stay with? My sister studies and doesn't have room for me, and there's no one else, no. Please visit the PhD, that is Public Housing Department. They will help you find a solution. And do I have to pay for all that? Grandma gave me some money, but not enough to live on. We'll do everything to help you. You'll get benefits so you can continue your studies. Thanks, I'll check the PhD right away. So you could now go to the PhD, sort your housing out, find an apartment or something. But you could also look around here. For example, we're at the social assistance office. So I could, for example, talk to this person here. Sorry. And as I said earlier, there are a lot of negative or ugly sides to poverty, right? And we did not put those in the central mechanics of the game. What we did do was we sort of put them in side stories. For example, this person you can talk to. Hey, you're here for some help? Yeah, I can't get a job. That's what the person says. How come? My name is Ahmed. A pretty name if you ask me. Thanks. I hope they can help you here. I hope so too. My wife's scheduled to give birth later this month, so I have to get some money by then. Whoa, a baby, congratulations. Thanks, it was nice to meet you. I'll see you around. So you see, it's just a side story. It does not really affect your gameplay, but it's just a side story. And there are several of those in the game. So the more painful parts of poverty, some of them you get to see that way. So. Actually, I think I've gone through most of the important stuff. I have about, say, 10 minutes left. If it's okay with you, I would like to end here. Oh yeah, maybe one important thing. It's not very easy to to turn off this, the downloadable game. So what you first have to do if you put it on full screen is you have to go there. Oh yeah, there's a few more things to show you that may be useful. First of all, you have a bag in which you put objects. You just go, you move your mouse cursor over the girl's face. And you have a bag, and you have a phone in there, for example. You sometimes have to use your phone. And then there's also this sign, and that's, on the one hand, you can get a big map, where there are also buses you can use. And then there's also quests, and that's all the tasks you get, everything you need to do. And it's quite a linear game, so you can... It's quite a linear story, so you can just see there where people have to go. And then there's also these statistics. There are several statistics, so you get happiness, for example, general happiness, but also health, and then also social happiness. Do you feel connected with other people? And then you have money, of course. And then to turn off the game, you have to go here. So I'll show it again. Wait. You go to this icon, and then you put it on Windows, and then you can turn it off. There you go, so far for ping. Now everyone is trying out the game, but I would like to ask you, are there any questions? Anything? So I'll ask you a question. Do you think you could use this kind of game in your work? Do you think you could? Do you see any problems? Say next week you would like to use that game in class. What would happen? Would it be possible? Yes? Okay. I'm very interested in your experiences, so you can always send feedback. There's an email address on the website. You can always send feedback on the game, suggestions, problems, whatever. So I really hope you will try out the game in class. It has been used quite successfully. There are different ways of using the game in class, but you'll learn a lot more about that in the next presentation. So I propose I end here. There's a coffee break now. So anyway, thank you for your attention, and talk to you later.
So let's move on to the afternoon session, which is really about the core part of the handbook, which is the curricular links and the learning outcomes. And more specifically, the learning activities you might want to do in your class, within your subject, with your students. So the starting point, of course, is the ping game itself. And then I wanted to look at the curriculum links and learning outcomes, which are in the handbook itself. You can follow if you like here, it might be helpful. It's on page 26. So what I will describe next is the general outline of the curricular links and learning outcomes. So, yes, page 26 in the Portuguese version of the handbook. And so, as you will see, I've taken this note here about what pupils should be enabled to do. So this is the core learning outcomes they should achieve as a result of playing ping and being sensitized to the issue of poverty. So I think it might be useful to go through these together. As you will note that they are very general, and this is deliberate, because of course we want this to be applicable to as many different subjects as possible, and not only in terms of subjects, but in terms of skills, and also between the 14 and 18 already. It might not seem like so many years, but there's already a variety of different levels to cater for. And of course, finally, for the European context, because it has to fit the curricula of many different countries. So this is why we keep it quite a general level, but nonetheless, I think, I hope they are rather applicable to most curricular contexts. So firstly, pupils should be enabled to acquire knowledge, skills, and values, very importantly, to develop an informed and critical understanding of the social, economic, political, and environmental issues. So you can see from this list, it's already quite clear that the issue of poverty is multidimensional. So you can't really talk about such a topic without embracing all of those areas, whatever your discipline or whatever your background is. Also to be noted, knowledge, of course, is what people are most used to hearing about when talking about education, but of course skills is becoming more and more important. So it's not just assessing facts and information about poverty, but the skills you're able to use, and also probably even less spoken about are values. But as Jan mentioned earlier, playing the ping game is supposed to be experiential, it's supposed to engage you emotionally, and this is also because you're more likely to have an impact then when you're emotionally involved in what you're learning about. So these are the three aspects to be underlined. Next, it's important to develop an understanding of the moral principles that can be applied to making informed social choices. So this might come up in religious education, for example, but not only, we have to make moral choices in everyday life. And so it's important for them to get a critical understanding of those social choices, what they need to know in order to be able to make the choices that are relevant in the game, but also the consequences of such choices. As a brief example, as you will see later, when you play the game itself, perhaps you might need to get an evening job in order to earn money because you're poor, but this may then impact on your friendships because you're not able to see your friends in your spare time because you're busy working. So you might think you're making one step to improve your situation, but in fact sacrificing another. So it's these choices that we want students to reflect on and be aware of. Thirdly, they need to know how to discuss, debate, and analyse sensitive and controversial issues. This I think is quite interesting because, of course, such skills as discussing and debating are important in any area of the curriculum. But the controversial issues is an aspect that's particularly relevant, I think, to ping. For example, even if you just take Jim's situation, so you will remember Jim is the male character you can play through in the ping game. He is in a situation of circumstantial poverty. So in fact, he hasn't inherited his poverty from his family, like Sophia, who does inherit her poverty from her family context. But he, in a way, almost as a result of the choice he makes to leave home, finds himself in a situation of poverty. So this is a little bit controversial, really, because students might challenge it and say that he chose to become poor. Had he not made this choice, he would not be poor. So these are the subtle issues that we really want to bring out and discuss further with pupils, using the game as a stimulus for further thinking. The next point is to make sure that they realise the importance of playing a responsible role as a citizen, of not just the local, but the regional, national, European and global levels. And that's really where poverty has relevance at all levels, and students need to think outside of start by thinking of their local context, what poverty means in Lisbon, for example, and then think at all the different levels. And this can be done through debates in various of the activities that take a geographical scope in the handbook. Next, this is more of an ICT-related goal, is for them to use ICT in a responsible, safe and effective manner to enhance and further their learning. So not to forget that the game is an ICT tool. So for those of you directly teaching about ICT, you can highlight that aspect more. But even for those of you teaching history or geography, not to forget that they're also learning digital competences by using the game. So it's not just about the content, but the skills needed to play such a game. Also to understand that every policy must take into account the standpoints and interests of all parties involved. So this is a rather general but important point. And finally, to be confident in problem solving and know where to go and who to ask for advice in different situations. So this refers more particularly to the social services, for example, in the game. So to really highlight that in all national contexts, the government have got social services available for people experiencing poverty. And while this might be frustrating, as we heard earlier, for bureaucratic reasons, ultimately they are seen as a solution in the game as to how to emerge from the situation of poverty. So these are the general learning outcomes. And just to get an idea, are these too general? Do they have some resonance with the learning outcomes in your curriculum? Are you able to relate to these? A little louder? Yes? Yes? Great, great. So this was the intention, for them to be a little applicable to everyone. So, the next part I will talk about briefly is the introductory lesson plans. So there are first 2 introductory lesson plans in the handbook. So if you turn the page of your handbook to page 29, section 5.2, you get to the lesson plans. So there are only 2 lesson plans because the remaining part of the handbook are more general learning activities. And there is a very good reason behind this. The lesson plans have a clear structure and also indicate time, how long each activity should roughly take, to ensure the game is introduced effectively and that there is sufficient opportunity for debriefing. But this is only the introductory part, because we felt that this would be good for teachers to be able to follow a slightly stricter structure when introducing the game, but then to give teachers full flexibility and autonomy to use the learning activities in any way they see fit. So what I propose today is that we go through at least the 2 introductory lesson plans together in the form of a sort of fake simulated lesson, where you will be my students for the day and I will be your teacher. And then the next part, which is the more interesting part, the clusters of learning activities, which, as I explained, don't have any time indications because they are kept flexible and general for you to pick and choose what you find relevant to your class and situation. This will be where you take over and can tell me how you would integrate these activities in your lessons. So to give you a general idea of how we came up with the learning activities, they are supposed to link the game itself to concrete learning activities and outcomes, maximizing the game's potential as a stimulus for further learning and a deeper understanding of poverty, save your time by providing simple and ready-to-use learning activities, including objectives, resources, modes of learning, the context from the ping game, so you can immediately make the link, pardon me, and activities as well as follow-up work. When I say ready to use, I mean this in a very large and non-committal sense. Depending on your context, they might be fine as they are, or they might need some adapting, but this is up to you to assess. They allow for flexible use, enabling teachers to select or disregard any of the activities or objectives, depending on the activities, their suitability for the subject you are teaching, the learning outcomes you are aiming at, and the specific needs of your pupils, of course, and not forgetting the time available, as that's always a pressure to be considered. So this is the general structure of section 5 of the handbook about curricular links and general learning outcomes. So now I propose, unless there are any questions at this point, that we look at the lesson plans themselves, which are just the introductory to, and these are on page 29 through to 34. And as I said, this is the structure of what all the activities look like. So we start with objectives, which is quite common in most lesson plans. The time needed, as I said, at least in the first 2. The resources needed, the modes of learning, the context from the game, which is very important, and then activities and follow-up activities. This also is not strict. I mean, some of the activities you might find take too long and you prefer to do them as follow-up activities. You can, of course, swap as you see fit, but most of the time you will see that the follow-up activities are thought of in terms of work that can be done at home, for example, or outside of the school context. So this is a general structure that all the activities follow, but I've taken the example of the very first one, seeing as today we are introducing the topic and the game itself. So this way we can introduce it to you as well before to your students. So the objective of the introductory lesson is to simulate the experience of being poor, of course, in Europe from different perspectives. Different perspectives here means from the situation of generational poverty and circumstantial poverty. So the game is used as an introductory activity to help explore the causes of poverty, distinguishing between these 2 types. The time suggested for this introductory lesson is 55 minutes, and as I believe was mentioned earlier today, that's actually fine for the Portuguese context because you have longer than that usually, which is great. And this would include gameplay and learning activities. Of course, preferably if you can play the game for longer, that is advisable. but that's not a luxury that all teachers will have.
Maybe it's interesting to know the game was conceived to be, you can finish it in about 45 minutes. If you're really good. Yeah, if you're really good player. Like
No, it's a good point, yeah. So that's to complete the whole game. So if you wanted to play the whole game, you would need the 45-minute session and then, of course, a follow-up, because we really advise that there is a briefing session before you start playing, then you play the game, and then you have a debriefing session. And it's really important these are followed in this order for the maximum impact on learning to occur. So if you really want your students to complete the game, then try and get a double lesson where you could have an hour and a half perhaps to ensure everything can be completed. If not, if you have to break it up, then the handbook caters for that in these 2 lessons, which it's spread over 2 lessons, so you can do it that way. If that is the case, then you need to make sure you refresh the memories of your students by giving them some kind of teaser questions so they remember what they were playing last time. But we will look at that together next. So, then you need to look at the resources. As we mentioned before, not necessarily in the ping situation will you need the internet if you have already downloaded the game on your computers before you start teaching. For this particular introductory lesson, I've included post-its, which for those of you who don't know, I don't know if this is a term you use, are just these sticky, use the same, sticky bits of paper, printed handouts of game instructions. Now, this you might think is useless because they have the game instructions actually within the game. As Jan showed us earlier, there are some screenshots which are actually reproduced in the handbook, which show you exactly the mechanics of the game, how you move your character, etc., etc. But there is a reason for including the printout of the game instructions. Can anyone guess why? As teachers, why would you want to also have them printed, perhaps? No? Well, the thinking behind this is simply that students are usually quite excited when they have a game in front of them, and they might do what some of you today were doing, I noticed, which is rush ahead and get to the game, start playing, without actually having had the briefing beforehand. So to avoid this, to avoid students to start playing before they've listened to the background information that you will give them, it's nice to have the game instructions so you're not actually already on the computer yet. You have their full attention and they're able to really grasp what you're saying. So this is just a suggestion. Modes of learning, in this particular module, let's call it, there would be a mixture of a whole class discussion with group work, as you will see later when we do the activity itself. The context from the ping game for this introductory lesson is Sophia's situation. She finds herself in one of generational poverty, and Jim's situation, which is circumstantial poverty. So it's to unpack these rather loaded terms and explore them with your students. And then I will go into the details of the activities and follow-up activities in the next slide. Question, Jan? Yeah.
No, it's just a remark about the instructions. What you'll also notice, well, what we noticed while testing the game is that there's always a class dynamic. So you will indeed, everyone will rush past the introductory screens. No one will look at them, and then they'll start clicking. Yeah. But then you have those students that have experience with games, and they'll find out how it works, right? And then all the rest will start talking, and how do you do that? How do you do that? So it's, although it is a single-player game, you'll notice that it's actually played multiplayer. Yeah. And also while they are playing, they'll start shouting, "Oh, have you been there?" And actually, some teachers sort of they reacted quite like defensively and said, "Oh, keep it quiet, keep it quiet." But generally, most teachers just let it be, and it was okay mostly in most contexts. So there was really that dynamic side remark.
No, absolutely. No, but that's an important point you touched on, because you described it as a single-player game, but in fact in the handbook we don't really underline that. We underline that it can be played by multiple users, and actually encourage that because of what I described earlier about the importance of collaborative learning. And precisely because it is an adventure game, and students want to share their experiences about You know, did you find that this helps you get to the next level, etc., or you know, what status bar are you on? Do you have 85% happiness or only 60% happiness? I mean, they want to compare, they want to share experiences, and as teachers, we shouldn't want to limit that. We want them to talk. It does mean that you have to think of a different class dynamic, perhaps less traditional in that sense, where people are moving around the classroom, looking at other people's computer screens, and wanting to make noise and share. So this is up to you to be open to this, but I really think that it's beneficial in the end. So that's something to think about. Okay, so let's simulate this experience now. This rather basic but important introductory lesson about the issue of poverty. So if I have a pen somewhere, which I have, great. So I suggest we now pretend that we are at the beginning of the ping experience. I'm your teacher for the day, you are my students, and it's the first time you're confronted with ping. The game, the manual, everything. So you have to put yourself in that position. So what we suggest to do is, before even introducing the game, to start a class discussion to get people thinking about the issue of poverty. And to do this, we have to think about poverty as a relative term. So what does it mean not only to be poor, but in comparison, what does it mean to be rich? So I would suggest that you would start a discussion in a rather basic way, and talk about these two concepts, but in a broad sense, not just a rich person and a poor person, but perhaps rich countries and poor countries, perhaps being rich not in just a materialistic sense, but also perhaps you could be considered to be rich spiritually or in other ways. So really to broaden the discussion as much as possible. So so let's try it out, if you're happy to play with me in this sense. And let's discuss a little bit about rich and poor. So, you can pretend to be 16, shall we say, or you want to be younger? Older? What's how old? 16 is okay. Okay, great. So yeah, sweet 16, there you go. Perfect, perfect. Great. So let's just get some brainstorming at the beginning. So you have to imagine you don't know anything about the game, so you don't know how poverty is described in the game and explored. So what would you think about? What would be your first thoughts when thinking of these two words? What about rich? What do we think? Just money, absolutely. Yep. Just fire away, just be boisterous and hurl things. You don't need to put your hand up. Big car, yes. So we can tell the boys in the car. Big cars, yeah. PlayStation, okay, great. We've got the game aspects in. Nice clothes. Okay. Oh yeah. Anything else on the rich side?
Many friends.
Friends, okay, this is a good way of getting away from the materialistic things, but looking at richness in terms of popularity as well. So more likely to have friends, and perhaps that's because you have money, perhaps it's because you drive nice cars. So you have to think about that. Travel, great, travel is always nice. To Lisbon in particular. Better school results, okay. Okay. Better school results. That's a good point. Success. And success, how would you define success?
It's kind of when you get what you want, independently of the context. You get what you want. It's sometimes being rich is, is that.
Yeah.
Getting what you want.
Getting what you want.
Not only the basic needs, but more than that.
Okay.
Whatever you dream.
So luxury.
Luxury.
Yeah. So you have access to luxury, you have access to instant success, as you say.
Dreams come true.
Yeah, okay. Well, even dreams come true would be the result.
Yeah. Never come true in the other side.
Yeah.
Almost never come true. If we think more in a materialistic way, because that is not liquid, that it's like that.
Of course.
Whatever. Dreams come true is more than
they're more the rich, absolutely. But even the fact that they can have dreams in the first place, they can dream because they maybe have the the resources.
If they are rich, they think they can get everything.
I'm sorry, they can.
If they are rich,
Yeah.
they can get everything.
Yeah.
Is the God that the poor people step on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Expectations.
Yes. So they have expectations, high expectations on it, yeah. And can receive what they want, really.
Happiness.
Happiness. Now that's a very important one. Happiness. Okay. Now that could be debated. I mean, if a student presents you with that answer, rich, happiness. The others, it's maybe less necessary to debate. I mean, money, rich, yes, okay. Being able to afford a PlayStation, you have to be relatively rich, yes. But happiness, I mean, this is where you can really unpack the discussion. Why are people who are rich happy? Is that true? I mean, there are many people that are and not happy. Why? Yes. They have a different answer, exactly. Brilliant. So this is exactly the point, that once they start giving you answers like this, you can start saying, who is asking the question? Who is asking the question? What is it to be rich? Is it a rich person? Is it a poor person? So who is asking the question is very important. Who is experiencing it? Etc. So this is exactly it. Okay, I think that's a good starting point. Perhaps you could look at what you might, as 16-year-old students, think of at first sight when you think of what it is to be poor. Woo. A lot of answers at the same time. A little louder, maybe? Social neighbours. Social neighbours? Okay. Oh, the kind of ghetto. Okay, that's okay, yeah. So it's poor neighbourhoods, yeah? Yeah, poor neighbourhoods, ghettos, okay. So we're already in a completely different world, yeah?
I would say that trying to see it in the perspective of young, it's the word yes and the word no in different areas, because what we get in openness is almost no's. So many things, and yes in the other. So, well, not the 16 talking, it's not 50.
Negativity.
Yeah.
Nothing and everything, yes and no.
Yeah. So here we would have...
Not necessarily like that, but we're trying to do it as a kid too.
yeah, in their thinking terms, yeah. So they would think maybe in yes terms for the rich, as you say.
No.
And poor people have to experience no. No to the big car, no to the PlayStation. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I guess in a way you could also...
Yes. Not
having all this, you could ask your students basically to put this in a negative sense, and this would also be partly what it means to be poor, but not only. I mean, obviously much more. I'm sure we can do better than that. What else can we think of in terms of poverty? Starvation. Okay, so now we're looking at really much harsher circumstances. Starvation, or at least, yeah, going hungry, yeah. Yeah, and more along those lines. What else? Right, lack of housing. No housing. I think I heard crime. Did someone say?
I would say that sometimes kids associate with being poor is being a criminal in the village there. So crime is kind of
Definitely associated, yeah.
sometimes associated with being poor.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other quite extreme? Because I think you will find, at least, that when you ask students, they tend to look at the extreme when they look at the stark comparison between rich and poor. But actually, what the game will show, and that's the important point, is that you don't have to be poor and starving necessarily, but you can be poor in other very meaningful ways, which definitely influence the quality of your life, but it doesn't mean that you're starving. Yeah.
Thinking about culture or education, it's unknown there, and yes, sometimes there, because the opportunities are different, and that defines another kind of being poor. It's
Yeah.
when you don't have access to information, when you don't
Yeah.
see to things you need, because you don't even know
Yeah.
where to go to get them.
Okay, excellent. So, no access to information. Okay, oops, I didn't mean to cross that, sorry. Okay, so what I would then do when you're looking at the first brainstorming they've done on the two issues of what it means to be rich and poor, is to highlight the ones that are materialistic. So, for example, you would put all this together as materialistic issues. But then to really draw attention, these are the most obvious, you think of it in terms of economic terms, but then to really draw attention to the other areas, such as well-being. So happiness can be considered as an important issue for well-being. Do we have education anywhere here? Yes. We have this better school results. So underline that this is an issue about education. What else do we have here? What about this? Social, exactly. So the social aspects of being poor. So by categorizing them like this, you start getting to realize that it's a multidimensional problem, and that when they play the game, they have to be aware of other things rather than just materialistic poverty. Okay, and then you would do the same thing here. So what do we have? No access to information might be because they can't go to school, for example, or they don't have the same access to cultural activities. No, housing is more of a economic problem, etc. So this would be the way you start off the discussion. Of course, there is no time limit to how long this could go on for, but I suggest when they start thinking more broadly, you can stop so that they have still some enthusiasm left to actually play the game. And then you move to splitting the students into small groups to discuss further in what ways and why can people be poor. So this discussion was more about in what ways you can be poor. And now what you do in small groups, which I would like you to do, is discuss why. Okay, so this is a preparation thinking for the game itself. Why can people be poor? So just 5 minutes talking next to the person next to you, and then more feedback. Why can people be poor? So moving away from what, in what ways to why. What are the causes? Yeah, I was going to say that. Right. Is that too light, or can you still see? You can still see. Okay, great. Okay, even if you just, yeah, great. Okay, sorry, just one moment, just to interrupt the discussion for one moment. If you could write down each of the reasons you find for why people can be poor on one post-it. You can have several, but you could just distribute them. And you want your one or two, we probably need some more. We have more, okay, great. So for each reason why, you just write it on one post-it. Yeah. One per reason. We've got some orders being. Then what we need actually is yeah. For one reason, yeah. Sorry. Preferably in English. It would be a real test for me to have to understand in Portuguese, but that would be great. And, do you know if it's possible to get big pieces of paper? I just realised that would be great. We would actually need that. I realise now. Just quite large pieces of paper, if possible. Or we can, yeah. Sorry, I just realised it would be useful to have large pieces. Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. Even if they're small, it doesn't matter. It's not A4, but just great. Sorry. Ah, it's this. Okay. Thanks. Okay, remember that you're thinking about this before playing the game. Huh? So you don't have the knowledge from the game. So you don't have the knowledge about generational poverty yet. You don't know what it means to be circumstantially poor. This is prior to the experience of playing the game. So you're 16 and you have basic ideas, okay, at this stage. Okay, you have to imagine yourselves in this situation. Not to patronize 16-year-olds, they can have rather advanced ideas, of course. Okay. Okay, so 5 minutes are up. Have you had enough time? Yes? Okay, so how many post-its do we have? How many reasons? 1, 2, 3. Ooh. We have over here, I think, 8, 9, 10. 10, okay. So before playing the game, huh? Your ideas before playing the game, excellent. And over on this side of the room, how many reasons did you find for being poor? Possible reasons. Yeah. Is lower, yeah. So this is already an example of a reason. At this stage I was just asking how many, but that's great. Okay, perfect, thank you. Excellent. Okay, so once you've got your students to do that exercise of thinking before they play, what it means. Pupils, attention please. Okay, so once you've asked your students to do this pre-thinking to the game and to write down the different reasons on the post-its, now you inform them that ping is available, that there is a game that discovers and explores this area. But before accessing the game, before even showing them the URL, you make it clear to them what objective they should have in mind while playing. So as you can see here on the third point, the objective is for them to follow while they are playing, to think about whether the issues that arise in the game are those already identified in the whole class discussion we had from what was on the board, or from the small group discussions they had, okay? So if these reasons are not full, and when they play the game they realise there are other ways of being poor, other reasons for being poor, then they have to add them to their post-its, okay? So they play the game, and while they play, they add the reasons they find to the post-its, and then tell them before they play the game that the reason they have to do this is because eventually they will be asked to create a flowchart. I think I call it a flowchart, or some sort of diagram. Yes, here we call it a flowchart, but they have to design some kind of framework to describe this cause and consequence relationship, okay? So they will get a big piece of paper like this. You can even get bigger ones if you like, and you will ask them to place the post-its on the sheet in whichever way they organise, logically speaking. So a cause of poverty might be a parent having no job, for example, the consequence of that, etc., etc. And the idea is that they realise the vicious kind of circular nature of poverty, that you might start here and want to emerge from poverty, but unfortunately the consequences are that you end up back in poverty because of the frustrations you face. So this diagram is supposed to show them that the circular nature, the vicious circle of poverty. So what would be next? So you tell them about this flowchart, which will be the outcome of their learning, so they are aware of it before they start playing, so they know what they have to think about when they play the game. And the end result will be for them to present their flowchart to the rest of the class, okay? So then you can ask them to compare theirs to others, ask them why they put this as a cause, perhaps education as a cause, and perhaps they also put education as a consequence. You ask them to explain the reason behind the causes and consequences of poverty. Okay, and of course it would be different from Jim's perspective or Sophia's perspective, and this is important. So you would need to split the class and ask half of them to play through Jim and ask the other half to play through Sophia. And of course, depending on which character they play, it will look different. Their chart will look different. As the reasons for poverty are different, the consequences are very similar, but the reasons will be at least different. Okay, and then at this point, we suggest that you distribute the pre-prepared handouts of the instructions. So as we explained before, This way they're not tempted to start playing the game immediately, but they follow on the paper with you or on the board, as I'm doing now, the instructions. And for you to go through the initial screenshots that Jan showed us earlier today for the basic mechanics, so how to move the characters, how to enter a building, etc. So in fact you can view those now. They are in here, as you know. Yeah, you can either give your handbook to the students themselves or just produce handouts. Then it's the time to play. So you've done the briefing section. So as I mentioned before, you have the briefing part 1 of a games-based learning lesson. Then they get to play. And then what happens after playing? To consolidate the learning, debriefing. Okay, so it's really a sandwich. The playing really is just in the middle of the sandwich. It's not really where the learning takes place, in actual fact. As Jan mentioned earlier, it was interesting, I thought, how he described it, but the game is experiential. It's not necessarily a learning game in that sense. You experience poverty, but the learning really happens in the briefing, which the teacher is responsible for, and in the debriefing, when you reflect and unpack the different issues that emerge in the game. So, so this is the sequence that should be followed. So, now it's your turn to actually do this part, part 2, as you are students today, not teachers, and play the game. So I suggest everyone plays for about 20 minutes, so you get a chance to enter some buildings, talk to some social assistants, so that then we can do the debriefing session together on the basis of what you learned when you were playing the game. So, you remember your objective? Why are we playing?
Yes.
Yes. What is the objective?
First,
Yeah. What are you going to think about when you play the game now? Absolutely, yeah. So from a young person's perspective, what it means, but also to remember concretely in this lesson plan to compare what you have on your post-its already to what you see in the game. Okay? So give me one reason, please. What reason do you have? Anyone from your post-its?
War.
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 War. Absolutely, war. Okay, great. So war, does it feature in the ping game? I'm afraid not. It's not a shoot-up scenario. But for example, war would be one. So you would already, when playing the game, know this is not an issue covered by the game, but something to think about. The reverse situation would be that the game offers a new insight into poverty that you have not already got in your list of reasons. So you just complement it this way. So please go to the website. You remember it's povertyisnotagame.com. You've already, most of you, I think, downloaded it now on your laptops.
It's probably best if you download it, because if
Yeah.
you all go online at the same time, the wireless adapter will be very strained.
Most people have
It's quite easy and quick to download.
Yeah.
So if you need help, just call me.
So Jan is here, which is great. So please take advantage of his services and mine if you need help. So just, you need help. Okay, great.
So you need help downloading or? No, it's a problem. Okay.
Okay, so we'll get everyone to access the plugin or the URL page. So, those you have, please start playing, but also I give you this sheet of paper for you to start designing this famous flowchart we spoke about. So you put the post-its you already have on a diagram to show the causes and consequences of being poor from the character you play. So you choose Jim or Sophia and add the reasons you find when playing the game. Okay? You can work in 2-3 people together. So you work together? Yeah? Great. Okay. time I go past this. Okay, great. Oh, fantastic. You need help? Yeah, sorry. Copy that. So you stick the post-its on the paper to make a diagram. Okay. So the idea was to have one reason per post-it. So unemployment is one. Yeah. You work together in three? Okay. For you? You work with them? Okay. And you have? Do you have one? You work together? Great. Yeah, maybe, yeah. Yeah, so you play both from the same character? Yeah.
No, 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 no.
Ah, okay. Ah, okay.
It actually doesn't do it on this effect. I know that in some browsers there have been problems with this.
Are you mostly able to view it full screen? Yeah? You are? You're not the browser, you downloaded it. Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, it is in most browsers it is possible to go full screen also when you're playing in the browser, but I'll try it again.
Oh, this is Explorer. What else do they have? No, don't worry. Okay, so teacher warning, you have 10 more minutes to play, 10-15 minutes to play some more and to complete your flowcharts. Okay? Right, 10 minutes.
Go to this icon and you take whatever. And then you can just play was wondering if you managed to get the camera moves right. So you can actually move your camera around as you wish. If you use your right mouse button and then you move the mouse, you keep the right mouse button pressed and then you move your mouse, then you get this kind of selections. Right? So you can actually watch wherever you want. And if you press escape, you're back in your browser. But this actually only works, this does not work in Internet Explorer, so it's kind of, well, not in all Explorers. But anyway.
Okay. Thank you for that technical tip. Okay, so let's bring the class back together. So I want you to imagine that that was the end of the first introductory class. So unfortunately, because of the pressures of the school timetable, you have to cut here. And we now imagine 1 week later, we're back in the classroom. So your students come with the charts they made last week. They come back to the classroom and they've already forgotten ping because they've been doing Latin homework, they've been in the science labs, and so they need to refresh their memories. So we suggest that you could start the second lesson, the second introductory lesson, with just some refresher questions that are in the handbook. I just selected some here, but there are more questions in the handbook. So let's pretend we're back here. Could I have some light again this way, please? Great. So we're back in the classroom and we're going to debrief to remind students about the ping game. So, first question, what is the topic of the game and what are the main issues raised? Just very, very quickly to refresh our memories of the game. You just played it, so you're in a privileged situation. Your students would have had a time between lessons. So, topic of the game? Come on now, it's afternoon, wake up. Poverty, right? Yes. Main issues raised in the game. Only poverty? What other issues are raised? Illness. Absolutely. Health. Health is definitely raised. Family problems, social problems, other issues. So this would be under social, yeah? Absolutely. We had something in Portuguese. Could you translate what you said? Yeah, the sister. Ah, okay. So family that helps. So the sister is family breakdown. Absolutely. So these are the issues you want to remind students that were present in the game they played last week, perhaps. The main goal of the game, so be careful here, is the goal to get rich? Provoke your students, is that the goal of the game? To get rich? No, no. What is the goal then? Just to survive. Ah, only to survive? Will you do well in the game if you survive only? Make the situation disappear as much as possible? Yeah? What about good life balance, huh? To get a good life balance. So more than surviving, but to have a as normal as possible standard of living. Yeah, exactly. Then remind your students of the main characters and their stories. So, Jim's story. What's Jim's story? He has problems with his father, yeah? So what happens? He sells his bicycle and he leaves home. Okay, very quickly, Sophia's story. Someone else. Someone from the back who hasn't spoken yet.
We didn't did
Sophia. You, yes.
We didn't did Sophia.
You didn't play Sophia. Ah, so then you don't have to talk. Damn it. Who played Sophia? Yes, please. Oh, the question was Sophia's story. How does she become poor? Okay. Exactly. So she's left without the family. Absolutely. Okay. So, next question. Where does the game take place? Again, a trick question. Where are we? Where is Ping? Are we in Lisbon? Ping City. Okay. Does Ping City exist? Apparently. Perhaps more than we would wish. That's a good answer. But let's be less cryptic. Ping City. What does Ping City represent? Get your students to think why we chose a city called Ping. Why the city is not London, for example. Why? Why was this game developed? I mean, you can take the thinking further.
So we understand autism as a global thing. So we don't fix ourselves in this town or this city is worse than that one. So it's kind of our imagination could be any place.
Exactly. So that's exactly the point. It could be any place. So we want any student from any ethnic background or any city.
Well, it's not any place because perhaps in the evolution of this game, we should try some different scenarios because this is not London or Lisbon, but it's a town like those ones. And it is not, we cannot compare certain cultures. So this is more like European.
Well, this is it. So this is the next level.
Occidental.
Yeah.
You see, it's kind of
exactly.
You know, it's kind of,
yeah.
The references are more occidental and European and stuff like that.
And this is intentional, so you need to draw.
Yes, because you are concerning about not Africa or other places.
Yeah.
If you want to them, you can start to create with
a different reference point. Exactly. So the point here is to underline to your students that the city is a neutral city because it should apply to any European city, so you will see structures and services similar to those available in most countries. So the community centre, the job centre, all the social services available with very neutral names, so they're applicable in different contexts. But as our very useful participant mentioned, it is based in Europe, and this is important. The game is a European game, funded with European money, of course, and this is obviously specific to European students playing an understanding of the context. Okay, main challenges faced. We don't have so much time to go through this, but perhaps a more important question, what do you need? What is required to succeed in the game? What are the factors for success? Yeah. I'm sorry? Resilience. Well, that's a brilliant, brilliant word, because I think that sums up what you need. You need resilience because you need time, you need to go through the bureaucracy, and be patient, really. Anything else?
Like our life is whole time because she's always going somewhere to ask for help. It's like she has no power or it seems like that she has no power to do things. Have you already out? Can you offer me a job? Can you? So it's frustrating because it's like everyone can do things I can do nothing.
Yeah. So so one of the challenges, this also relates to not necessarily a requirement to succeed, but a challenge faced is definitely the frustration and the dependency. Yeah. So the dependency on other people and institutions, absolutely. But what actions can you do to help complete your missions? What can help you emerge from the situation of poverty in the game? Did you try anything? Ah, okay, you're at the housing level. Yeah.
Now she returns there, so I have not experienced enough to know what's next.
Okay, so we're not far enough in the game, perhaps, to answer this question, but of course your students will have gone on. Yes? Yeah. Yes. So the interaction with other people definitely counts, but also not just the interaction, but the actions you take count. Whether you spend money in certain situations or not, of course, makes a difference to your overall well-being. Okay. can you relate to the experiences? This is one of the questions you have to be very careful when you ask your students about how they identify perhaps with the characters in some way. I mean, on the most basic level, they probably are not experiencing poverty in the way that Sophia and Jim are, but perhaps they can relate to the frustration they feel when faced with bureaucratic institutions, for example. So you can ask them to reflect on that and to identify with the characters to some degree. Then ask them what they found difficult and why, and what does this show about the experience of being poor. Okay, so those were the refresher questions to start the lesson. And then what you would do is move on to the charts that were produced in the previous lesson. And so very quickly, because I want to move on to the next activity then, because we only have about half an hour. But I would like one group to present their charts from the perspective of Sophia, and one group to present from the perspective of Jim. So you would ask your class groups to come up and to practice their presentation skills. So who would like to volunteer? Or do I have to pick somebody? Anybody who would like to present Sophia? No. Would someone like to present their charts showing the causes of Sophia? Would you mind? Great. So at this point you would remind your class of the objectives they were to complete for the chart and then ask them to present. So could I have your names? Who do we have? Archer. Archer will present with your friends, or you're doing Jim. Okay, great. Okay, great. So we have Archer who works on the yeah. Oh, you probably need a microphone though. You can put this on. So please speak here if you can, because.
In terms of in Portuguese or in English?
You choose. We can have a part in Portuguese if you like. Okay, Portuguese, why not? You want to do it in Portuguese? I can hold this if you want to explain. Stick.
I'm going to stick a post-it that is being homeless. I don't know if she's going to be homeless, but I'm just projecting. So this is a consequence.
Okay, perhaps we have to write where causes and consequences are. This is okay. So students are free to organise the charts in the way they think is most logical. Okay.
Breaking of a relationship between a supportive relative and a child. So this is a cause.
Breaking of a relationship between relative and child. Okay, so this is a
cause, I think.
Cause.
Look for relatives' help. In this case, her sister.
Sophia's sister.
It's a consequence.
Consequence of poverty. Okay.
Look for social assistance. It's a consequence.
Yeah. Social assistance as a consequence. That's good. Okay, you can maybe just write it.
And search for a house in a public house department. It's a consequence too.
And this is searching for a house. Is it's a consequence, no? Okay.
I don't have any more.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Archer. Thank you very much. Okay. So then you would ask the other groups who worked on Sophia to compare. So, did we have the same consequences as the same causes? The breaking of a relationship between a relative and a child? I guess you all had this as the main cause for Sophia's poverty.
We have that as a question because we don't know if she lost her parents or they abandoned her, so we use that as the factor that separates her from the main family, and she has a sister and grandma, so we don't know if that was the cause or illness or something like that.
So this is a a good point. So students might bring that up because we don't have so much background information about the parents, only about the grandmother. So the parents perhaps, what did they die? Were they unable to look after her? Is this the cause or not? Okay, so that's good to question that. Then consequences. Being homeless. Unemployed. Yep.
And lack of additional opportunities because she will continue to study, but it's difficult to have a job and study at the same time. So it's more difficult for her than to a person that has all the way very clean and easy without having to work. I don't know if she is on a secondary level.
Yeah.
She has
They don't say no, but when you progress in the game, you will see that education plays a very big role in helping her come out of poverty. So this is a good point to highlight. Okay, just quickly, someone to present Jim, their chart for Jim, to see if they have something different, something similar. Yes, please. Thank you. If you'd like to come.
Yes.
Great. And your name, please? Nunu. Okay. I'm sorry. Nunu. Nunu. Fantastic. And you come alone or someone will present with you? No? Volunteer. To help you, we can hold if you like.
Our brainstorming wasn't so well, so we are mixed of ideas and...
I'm sure it's very good. Yes, please.
Yeah.
And with Nunu we have... Pedro. And your backgrounds as teachers?
No,
from the community centres? Yeah. Excellent. Okay, let's hear your chart.
We did like no order specific, so we did some ideas.
So no specific order, yeah?
So we did without playing the game. We did some post-its.
Without playing?
Without playing.
Okay.
Supposed to not play the game.
Okay, so this is before you played. Okay, this is good. Okay.
We did unemployment, one of the reasons.
Okay.
And,
and this is from the character of Jim.
Yep.
Yep. So yes, he's unemployed.
And no school degree or something that it's not able to find a job.
Okay, so why no school diploma for Jim?
Because he's young, so he doesn't have a curriculum.
He hasn't finished yet. Okay, and then on this side, is this the consequences?
Could be. But the social status, it's one of the reasons we also thought about. We thought about the social status because with family it's more easy to getting started and getting off the vicious circle that the poverty can push a person to.
Okay.
And unable like a disease or not able to work. Disabled.
In that sense, disabled, okay.
It's something else, yes.
Okay, great. So that would be interesting if you got some students present what they thought about before playing the game and then what they could add to this chart after playing the game. So they might be able to slightly change what they consider to be a cause and what they consider to be a consequence. And you played then?
Not so much.
Not so long, yeah.
Only 2 charts.
Okay, and what did you find?
No, estás muito bem.
Please. So after playing,
the no job experience, it's the main cause that we...
for Jim, okay.
For Jim.
He lacks experience and so he is unable to get a job, is that what you mean?
Yeah, we noticed that he was like running around from one place to another, and the no job experience, it's the main cause that he only can get these kind of jobs.
So this is a barrier, absolutely.
It's a barrier.
Yeah, and the next one you have here?
Bad influences.
Bad influences. Anyone from the game you can share with us?
The first character,
Diego.
Diego.
Okay, Diego. Tell us about Diego.
He's not a good influence.
Not a good guy.
No.
Okay. Okay, and this leads to choices and objectives you put here.
Bad choices and bad objectives.
Okay.
Okay.
And
bad choices like associating, getting out of the parents' home.
Yeah.
Bad choices in associating to Diego.
Spending too much money.
Too much money.
Okay.
The objectives. I think that the main cause is getting off the parents' house.
Absolutely. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Something like that.
Okay, so a round of applause to all our Okay, great. So, now, in the last half hour, I want to take you to the last part of the handbook quickly. So those 2 lesson plans we just went through were very introductory. As you saw, refresher questions, basic activities about the issues raised, and the causes and consequences, which is really key to understanding the content in the game. But then you want to do something a bit deeper. You want to get into the various dimensions of poverty. And so for this reason, we developed 3 different themed clusters. So the first cluster is entitled Poverty in Developed and Developing Countries. So you move away from the individual, Jim and Sophia, and you upscale the debate and talk about poverty in countries. And so for quite obvious reasons, this particular cluster of learning activities could be particularly suited to geography lessons or economic lessons, for example. Do we have any geography teachers here? Geography, 1, 2, 3, okay. More, 4. And economics? 1 teacher, okay, great. So perhaps now in the last session, you could look at cluster 1 to relate this to your subjects, okay? To look at these activities in the light of geography learning, the geography curriculum in Portugal. Cluster 2 is about helping people experiencing poverty. So you probably haven't had a chance to look at this, but this is a rather different nature. And here we're not looking at countries necessarily, we're not looking at the geography or the economics of poverty, but more the social aspects of poverty, really understanding what the people experiencing poverty go through. And so this is probably more relevant to social studies, perhaps to citizenship, which I know is not a specific subject in Portugal as such. It's not a curricular subject from what I understand, but it is an area covered in Portuguese education. Am I right? Yes, okay. So anybody involved in teaching citizenship? Civica, yes. Next year you will teach citizenship? Also, excellent. So this perhaps would interest you more, this cluster of activities. It also actually talks about volunteering. So, as you know, last year was the European Year Against Poverty and Social Exclusion. And this year is the European Year of what? Do you know your EU knowledge? No? Poverty? No, not this year. That was last year. So the pin game was volunteering, exactly. So this year fits very nicely. After the year against poverty, the European Union is now looking at getting citizens to volunteer. So this cluster of learning activities, number 2, fits in very nicely with this volunteering aspect. And there are activities on volunteering in the handbook. So we have some people looking at this. And cluster 3 takes the discussion to another level. And here we're talking very much more generally about education, the role of education in fighting poverty, raising awareness, which of course is one of the main targets, goals of the PIN game, and most of all, ensuring an increasing participation in the information society. particular cluster of activities because we move a little bit away from poverty as such. Here it's really talked about in geographic, economical and social terms, but here we really move on to talking about digital games as a cultural phenomenon. So they look at it as a medium and critically assess it. So you ask your pupils what they think of the game itself. Was it designed well? Did IBBT do a good job? And you ask them to really understand and discover if it's a good tool to raise awareness. Do they feel they have learned from it? Do they feel that other students can learn from it? What does it mean to make a game? So in the lunch break, I was speaking to some teachers who are actually involved in game design and getting their students to design games. So you can ask them to think about this. How was the pin game designed? So the mechanics of the game. What does this mean in terms of graphics? What does it mean in terms of programming? So you can take the discussion to a whole other level. But also from the perspective of media studies, I think it's important. How is poverty described in the press in your national context? In Portugal, how is poverty described? How is it addressed? How does the government deal with poverty? So these are the kind of questions that the cluster 3 deals with. So what I suggest, we now have about 20 minutes or so. So just for 15 minutes, so that we have some time at the end, to look at these 3 clusters. Choose one. You can read it because there are only 2 pages, 2 pages for each cluster. I put the pages in the Portuguese version under each cluster, so you read the one that interests you from your discipline. So if you are a geography teacher, where are you, geography teachers? You're here, okay. So if you could read cluster 1 and see how this relates to your context. How could you use this in a geography lesson? Okay, and similarly for those involved in more social aspects. And lastly, information society, the technology perhaps coordinators could look at the last cluster 3. So you read the 2 pages relevant to your subject and discuss how it would fit in your context. And to help you do that, I have some questions here which we can go through together and you can think about when you speak in groups. So, are the activities relevant and feasible for the subject and the age range you teach? Does the curricular content to be covered and the skills to be learned, do they directly relate to that? Or do you have to adapt some of the activities in the cluster? Are there some things that aren't quite in line with the Portuguese curriculum? Okay? Are the resources needed readily and easily available? Do you have any school constraints and regulations that would make any of the activities too difficult to do in your classroom, for example? If so, can you work around these problems or maybe substitute them if you have ideas with other activities? How can you relate the material to previously learned content? Okay, so you think about what you've already covered with your pupils. Think about each activity in terms of a single subject approach. Would you put this activity as a geography activity, or is the activity described amenable to multidisciplinary thinking? Could you explore it from different angles? Is the activity time-consuming? How long is it going to take? How can you plan this? Should it be done as a classwork, or should it be done perhaps as homework? What about the distinction between low achievers and high achievers? Are the activities well pitched? So you need to choose the activity on the basis of the level of the students you're dealing with. This one is, point 9, is a suggestion that you might invite another teacher to come and teach, co-teach the session with you when you are introducing Ping from a different perspective. So you might have the geography teacher deciding to work with the ICT teacher. Okay, could this be a possible collaboration? Could this work with some of the activities in the handbook? And finally, are there other important questions not listed here that you would need to consider when using the activities in your lessons? Okay, so that's just an overview of the kinds of things we think would be important to think about. So please take the next 15 minutes to discuss this with your partner next to you from the perspective of your subject, your discipline, and the age range of your pupils. Okay, please. Questions 1 to 5 on the screen, and I will put questions 6 to 9 here, so you can see them all at the same time. Subject teaching and which suit better the multidisciplinary approach. Question 7 is about how time-consuming each activity is. Question 8 asks about the distinction between low achievers and high achievers. Are the activities suited to different levels? Could you co-teach a lesson? Is that possible in your school, to co-teach with the teacher from a different discipline? Could this be helpful to carry out some of the activities? And if you have any other issues not covered, please suggest these. Okay, so another 5 minutes to discuss. But before we do, it would be great if you could share some of the discussions you've been having from the different subjects. So, is everybody with me? Yes? Okay, good. I mean, you're doing great. It's nearly 5:30 and I can see everyone's still awake, which is very encouraging. Okay, so who looked at cluster 1? Cluster 1, you remember, if we look quickly at this was the cluster of activities about poverty in developed and developing countries. So from more of the geographic, economic perspective. Did anybody work on this? The geography teachers, you read cluster 1? Yes. Yes, you did? And could you maybe share some of your experiences? Yes, sorry? Any of the geography teachers, could you maybe share some of your experiences of reading this cluster of activities, what you found was useful, not so useful? Perhaps you answered one of these questions, please? No? So the geography teachers are very shy. This is the conclusion. Okay. What about cluster 2 activities, which were more about the social issues in Ping, the issues about citizenship? Did anybody read the activities for cluster 2? Yes? Okay. Could you please tell us which background, which subject?
Well, in my level, we have to see
civic education?
Civic education.
Mm-hmm.
So
So
it's
5th and 6th grade for people who don't understand age range?
10, 11, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's kind of the range.
Okay.
So we consider that yes. 1, yes, of course. 2, yes. Because all this is covered. All these questions and these concerns are covered in these areas. possible. But we thought that in perhaps, you know, that are the classes that have different ways. Kids that are already excluded from the normal system, older kids, the lower achievers, that are kind of separated because they are old, too old. Even we have in the 5th and 6th grade kids with 15 or 16 that are 14 or 16 or 15. So we can do a job because they have a flexible curriculum. We don't put them in the regular classes. So they have kind of technology ICT course. So they use the Portuguese and the general language and the science all together in a kind of flexible curriculum that is constructed to their needs.
Okay, so
it would be very interesting. I see that those kids that sometimes or many times are already in conflict situations and excluded in their neighbors, they go and see other situations and they fight their own exclusion by helping others and to understand the ways, by reflecting to the game, the ways to get out from the place where they are, and they are there, and they have special classes because they are finished.
Okay.
Because they lost the contact with the normal curriculum, so they failed and then we have this solution that sometimes works to be done with different things. The technology here play a very important role because they are so far away from the curriculum that only games and another kind of strategies
to re-engage them.
Yes. But if they can link this to the other cluster of constructing their own games, and that is, we are doing some experiments on that, and it's very useful. So not only consuming the games, but volunteering is important.
Yes.
And then constructing, becoming more competent on the things that will make you get out from the place where they are. So I think all this is possible in school we have, but we have
publication in your folders. So, firstly, just a few words about European Schoolnet, where I work in Brussels, as we are responsible for the handbook. We are a network of 30 ministries of education, and it started off as a small group of ministries more than 10 years ago, and now it has developed over the years to a very large network of ministries, not only in Europe, but also outside of Europe. So we have Israel, for example, and Turkey, who are also members, and they are really at the core of our work. But of course, the core target group are schools and teachers, so yourselves, and we do many projects in collaboration with them. So our three main areas of activity are information sharing and evidence building on policy research and innovation in the area of ICT in education, most particularly. We have a lot of school networking services, and probably the most popular and well-known one to you would be the e-twinning program, which is run by us at European Schoolnet on behalf of the European Commission. Has anybody heard of e-twinning here? Yeah, good, good. I hope you're all members. There's also a leaflet, I believe, in your folders about the program, should you want to know more. We also work in the area of advocating ICT and how this can contribute to transforming learning and teaching processes. And this brings me to our... Yes, next slide, sorry. Which is the structure of today's workshop. So I'd like to start by giving you a bit of background knowledge about the knowledge building we have been doing in this area of games-based learning. So not only Ping, but what came before Ping, to give you an idea for the rationale behind this project, to share with you some results from the Games in School study, which really can show you why games can successfully be used as learning tools, to build on what Jan was saying earlier this morning. Then to look at the aims more specifically of the Ping handbook itself. And then later on today, get you to do some practical work and look concretely at the 12 guided steps on how to use a game practically in the classroom. And then to look more particularly at the activities within the handbook and how to relate these to further learning about poverty. So let's look at a bit of the background work we've been doing about games-based learning at European Schoolnet. So we started some years ago now, in 2006, with the EMAPS project, which was actually run by teachers themselves, and it was teachers working with researchers on creating location-based games using mobile phones. So the website is still actually active, so you can see the results of the project and have access to the games created by teachers if you're interested in looking at that. Then in 2008, I was involved in the Games in Schools study, and this was quite a large study. This is a copy of the full report, which is 500 pages. So if you don't have time to read this, do not worry. There is a short report, which is made to summarize the results and be user-friendly. And this really was the first European overview of what is going on in games-based learning in mostly 8 countries. But it tried to give a bit of a pan-European view to see the status of games-based learning, how teachers are using the games, and what are the results. So I will talk about that a little bit later on, as it served as a backbone to the thinking behind the Ping manual. Then we moved on to the Imagine project later in 2009, and this really was working at a different level. It looked more at how to integrate games-based learning at the policy level. So here our target group were policymakers to see how this phenomena could be generalized. Then, of course, in 2009, we started collaborating with the network of European foundations to work on the Ping project, which is, of course, today's focus. And then a next project about footy, how to use a football-based learning game to motivate learning. And lastly, one that I would like to look in a bit more detail, which is the Linked project, which is still currently running. It's about to end at the end of this month. And this is about brokering research results to policymakers and teachers. And this, I think, would be particularly interesting for you. So, in fact, if you would like to follow, you can just go to the link, which is the hyperlink here. I don't know if it will work. So the link is linked.eun.org, if you would like to access it on your laptops, because I'd like to show you quickly what is available for you to use on this website. Have people found it? So it's linked.eun.org. Yeah? When I get at least one nod, then I will talk. So while people are finding the address, this basically is a platform where evidence is made available. It's research results, but communicated in a user-friendly way so that teachers can access the information in the way that best suits their needs. So if you will follow me, the 2 topics it deals with are digital competence on the one hand and digital games on the other. So today we're interested in digital games. So we can go here on the navigation tab. And as you will see, there are a list of questions that our researchers were looking at to do with digital games. Questions that are interesting for teachers and questions that are interesting for policymakers. So for example, from this list, you might want to know, how can digital games be used to teach the curriculum? So if you click on this question, you will see that the question is given an answer to in various formats. If you want a long research answer, you can look at the in-depth question. If you want a more summarized version of the key results, you can look at the in-short version. If you want something visual that you can show your class immediately, you can use a PowerPoint presentation. So in fact, maybe we can look at this just to give you an idea. Or there's also videos and teaching materials available. So here is the PowerPoint presentation, which is available actually in SlideShare, or you can simply download the presentation, which means you can use it and customize it as you like. So as you see, this is rather small, but if you download it, you can have the full view. But the results are shown in a visual and rather easy way. And this is accessible to everyone. So just to go back to the list of questions, please have a look yourselves when you have time, because this could be useful for you when you decide to use games in the classroom. For example, if you have any worries about using games, you might want to know about the violence and addiction aspects which many parents worry about, and also teachers. So this could be good to read and to inform the educational community that there is no need to worry necessarily, and so that they feel comfortable when you decide to use games in the classroom. So if we go back to... So if we return back to the Games in Schools project, which is this research study I mentioned, this was a European overview of the different types of games that can be used in primary and secondary schools in any subject. So we had to limit the focus countries, and we chose to work with 8 countries from different parts of Europe. So Austria, Denmark, France, Italy, Lithuania, Spain, the UK, and the Netherlands. And what we found actually in the work we did was that actually Denmark, the Netherlands, and the UK are fairly advanced in their use of digital games at school level. This has something to do with the fact that the ministry have taken on board the importance of gaming. For example, in the UK, in Scotland, it actually features in the National Curriculum for Excellence. So now it is a formal part of the curriculum, not only to use games as a tool for learning about content and skills, but actually to get the students to create games. So this is to link with 21st century skills of how creating and designing a game can be very beneficial to students' learning. In Denmark, they use it more as a cultural phenomenon. So they critically assess a game as a cultural artifact. So it's more in terms of media studies. They're looking at games. And in the Netherlands, they are also rather fairly advanced, looking at virtual learning environments as a learning space also. Then you have middle countries such as France, Italy, and Spain, who are beginning to experiment in this area and are doing some interesting things in mathematics, for example, at primary school level. And then you have countries that are barely starting, who are still not convinced, who are finding their way, such as Austria and Lithuania. So the study gives a real overview of the different levels of progress in this area. And these are the main questions the study really looked at. So why are teachers interested in using games? How do they use them? What are the results? And what are the obstacles they face, which of course is very interesting to people in your position. And finally, what is the attitude of each education system, which is what I partly addressed to you just now. So here are some key results from the study itself. This graph shows you the educational impact games are believed to have according to the teachers who actually use them. So we had a questionnaire with around 500 responses, so not hugely representative, but nonetheless significant. And this was how they rated the various aspects in terms of educational impact. So as you can see, a large majority find games are motivating, which is in line with the research Jan talked about earlier. But not only, but they also support students in difficulty. We found this particularly in France. Games are used as a remedial strategy to help students with learning difficulties or social difficulties. And they're also fundamental for personal skills, spatial and motor skills, and soft skills such as social skills. Less convinced are teachers about the ability of games to foster critical skills, which is an area we'll talk about a little bit later. And that's really where the teacher's role comes in. The game on its own cannot foster such critical, high-level thinking skills. It's where the teacher has to do the debriefing and create the pedagogical framework in order for this to happen. So this slide here shows you a little bit about what research tells us about cognitive processes, about how we learn, and in turn, in relation to this, what digital games can offer. So, for example, we know from research that intelligence is varied and distinctive. And games, indeed, they offer diverse modes of learning, so this fits rather nicely. Intelligence is also dynamic, and of course, games offer a pluridisciplinary approach because they reflect usually realistic situations. By nature, they address different disciplines. We also know from research that the pace of learning varies, and this is why it's so important that digital games embrace personalized learning so that you can learn at your own pace. We also know the importance of metacognition when learning, And games give feedback to the player, usually immediately. So this is very important when students are thinking about their own thinking strategies and how they are learning. Of course, being an active learner is very important, and games put the players in the pilot seat. So they really are at the heart of the action, at the heart of their own learning, and this is what makes them responsible for their own learning. And of course, the importance of peer learning, and games, which is not perhaps popularly known, of course, can be used collectively. It's not a zombie-type individual process. You can learn together, and this is obviously beneficial. So now to relate the background work we did with the Games in School study with the PING project, which is a small recent project, to show you what we learned and how we try to use the results from the study to feed into the process for creating the PING handbook. So one of the major research results was that it's very difficult to integrate games into the curriculum. So what the PING handbook tries to do is to make clear links to the curriculum and to general learning outcomes targeted at the 14 to 18-year-old age range that we were looking at. Another key result was, in fact, that there are actually negative attitudes towards games that need to be addressed. Now, these attitudes might be at various levels. You might have a fairly, may I say, old teacher who perhaps is not so much in contact with the game world, who might be a little bit cynical about using games in the classroom. Or perhaps you have at school management level no support in this area because they think it might be a bit dangerous or cause riot in the classroom, for example. Or indeed parents might be against their children using games because they associate them with dangerous or addictive, violent behaviors. So these are attitudes that we need to address when thinking about the school context. But to address them, we need to really inform people of the whole picture. So the PING handbook tries to explain the positive learning benefits of games to eliminate these misconceptions and also to underline that they are based on evidence, on research, also from the LINKS project we also did. Finally, we found that one of the main barriers is there is a lot of lack of information and lack of support for using games within an educational environment. So the PING handbook tries to provide pedagogical, technical, and contextual support on poverty and references for further information. So the key question, why use games as a learning tool? And these, I believe, are the principles underlying the PING handbook itself, based on the various research I mentioned before. So, because of motivation and the emotional involvement, which we heard about this morning, by emotionally engaging the player, they are more likely to enjoy the experience and therefore learn from it. The collaborative aspect, as I said, because in collaboration, learning does happen more efficiently. Also, it's important to notice that games-based learning often uses a constructivist approach because while you are playing, you are building meaning as a player yourself. The importance of the immediate feedback aspect, which is very important for metacognitive reasons. The development of key skills, also mentioned earlier. The learner empowerment aspect, so the learner really does feel as if they are taking control of their own learning. The personalization of learning, so this caters for children learning at different levels. So whether they be low achievers and maybe need a little bit more time, or high achievers that want to race ahead and get to more difficult areas. And finally, the cross-disciplinary approach, which is very much embraced by games-based learning. So, moving away from this sort of background knowledge on games-based learning, we arrive at the PING book itself. And so here are just the very basic aims of the toolkit. We firstly wanted to introduce to teachers the idea of digital games as a useful educational resource. So not just PING, but at the back of the handbook, in fact, you will find a list of other games which can be used to teach about poverty and other societal issues. Then we also wanted to provide a concrete 12-step guide regarding how to use any game in the classroom. So this is relevant to PING, in fact, because after each step we show concretely how this relates to ping. But of course, you can use the steps in a general way, which I will invite you to do later, and apply them to any game you wish to use in the classroom. And lastly, it was to provide teachers with learning activities and content related to the ping game. And this content, specifically on poverty, was supported by the European Anti-Poverty Network, who ensured that the content was not only up to date and relevant, but also politically correct, because we have to remember that when talking about such a sensitive issue like poverty, the language we use is very important, and the language we want our students to use when talking about poverty is very important. So this was a learning experience for me, because my expertise is not in poverty, but in education. But to give you an insight, for example, I referred originally in the handbook to poor people, and then it was the Anti-Poverty Network that underlined to me that actually we should talk about people experiencing poverty, which actually now makes a lot more sense, because of course they experience poverty, but we want them to experience other things about leading a normal life and participating fully in society. So if you talk about it in terms of an experience, it's something they can come out of. But if you associate them directly with an adjective such as poor people, then this is more problematic. So it's this kind of debate that was important to have this dialogue with the Anti-Poverty Network. So, of course, we try to make the handbook as flexible as possible so that it can suit the time available to teachers, and for them to choose whether to use a single subject approach or the multidisciplinary approach, which we will talk about more in detail this afternoon. So before we look at the 12-step guide and the learning activities themselves, I thought I'd give you a bit of insight into the other support and reference material in the handbook. So you have some facts and figures. For example, that 16% of EU population is at risk of poverty. So that's actually rather a large amount, which should have the shock factor for your students to realize. There are also issues underlined in section 6 of the handbook, such as the national and EU data on relative income poverty often do not identify some key groups at high risk. So this is an issue that you could discuss in great depth with your students. It also offers a glossary and a load of key terms within the poverty debate are highlighted, such as social exclusion, of course, which was the term used by the European Commission for last year's European year. And this refers to processes which push people to the edge of society, limiting access to resources and participation in normal economic, social, and cultural life. So the glossary is as much for you, in reality, as it is for your students themselves. There are also other resources, a table of examples of other serious games on different aspects of poverty. So, as you know, the Ping handbook and game deal with poverty in the EU, but of course there are other games available, for example, the United Nations Food Force game, which deals about poverty on a more global scale, so in third world countries, for example. And finally, there are references. And these are references to useful reports and literature on digital games for learning and the topic of poverty. So to be distinguished there, poverty in terms of the content, which is relevant to Ping, but more generally about digital games and how they can be used in the learning context are also available. So some brief words, I thought, about the feedback we got on the handbook. Because, as Jan mentioned this morning, the game itself was tested, but it's important to note that so was the handbook, because we wanted to make sure that this resource did speak the right language to teachers, was relevant in various national contexts, because you have to remember we're not using one curricula as the basis of the handbook, but all European curricula. So by nature it has to be, by default rather, it has to be rather general and applicable to all situations. So, of course, the most important were to get some pedagogical feedback. And we had a group of experts within European Schoolnet who work with different groups of teachers in different situations who gave us their comments. We also sent the handbook, a preview of it, to some eTwinning teachers. I don't know if any of them are here today, to ask them, and these were the different countries they came from. So quite a good spread: UK, Netherlands, Sweden, Ireland, Romania, Malta, Italy, and France. And they gave us detailed comments. These 8 teachers gave us very much detailed comments in terms of the wording used, in terms of the curriculum, and these were very, very helpful. We made quite a few changes on the basis of their comments. Then this testing relates more to the game itself, the 20 Belgian teachers and the 400 pupils where the game was tested. But in fact, indirectly, through the game testing, we also got some feedback on the initial draft of the handbook. So this was also useful. The poverty content, as I mentioned before, the European Anti-Poverty Network had a full look at all the content related to poverty to validate this. And in terms of the technical comments, because of course the instructions of the game are also within the handbook, and of course some technical comments are also made there. So these were checked both by GRIN and IBBT before the handbook was published. And then of course we had some general comments from foundation partners, including the Gulbenkian Foundation, which were very useful. And I think actually we shouldn't underestimate these, what I call general comments, because in fact they don't come from a specific education background, they don't come from a specific poverty background or a specific games-based learning technical background. So they often spot things that perhaps we who were too involved in the project could not see. So these comments were very, very appreciated as well. So now, as you see, it's your turn. So I've spoken a lot, but don't worry, I will speak a little bit more. But I would also like to get you to participate and interact as well. So for those of you who have read the handbook, have you all had a chance, in fact, to read this? Or is it the first time you see it today? First time? Oh, wow, okay. So then you will have to concentrate very, very hard. But please have a look at the handbook. Now, I think the Portuguese version, the page numbers are slightly different. So in the English version, this starts on page 16. And I think, and the title of the section is Selecting a Suitable Game. And I think in the Portuguese version, is it also 16? Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. So if you refer to page 16 of your handbook, we can get to the nitty-gritty, as they say in English, part of the work. The actual guidelines themselves about how to use a digital game within the classroom. So the first step is, of course, to select a suitable game. So, of course, Ping is easy. We've already selected it on your behalf because we know it's a serious game for learning. It's been tested and researched, and we are pretty confident it will be beneficial to pupils. But not all games are created and developed in the same way. And, of course, what's important to note is that commercial games can be useful in the learning context, but they have not been thought out in the same way with learning in mind from the start. But this should not mean that you don't use them. You just need to be aware that they are commercial and perhaps have entertainment as their main purpose, but you can adapt them or use them in the classroom nonetheless. So the first step one must do when thinking about using a game is identify the type. So is it commercial? Is it a learning game? Is it a serious game? And its purpose. Then identify the game genre. So who can remember what the Ping game genre is? An adventure game. Excellent. It's an adventure game. And then the associated learning benefits. So this you might need to think a little bit more about, but it's also an adventure game, but also what else does it do? Ping also simulates the experience of being poor. So what could you think as an associated learning benefit of that? If you're simulating the experience, of course, you're learning about what it's like to be poor. So these are the things to think about before you decide to use the game. You need to understand the technical requirements. And do you, from this morning, understand the technical requirements of Ping? Yes? Good. Good, good. So as you know, it's an online game, but it can also be downloaded, which, as Jan explained, is actually probably in school context beneficial, seeing as having everybody go to the URL at the same time to play the game might cause it to be a bit slow. So it might be a good idea to download the game on the school's computers before you decide to play it. But other games will have different technical requirements. You might need consoles. They might not be online games. They might need actual gaming equipment. So this is important to take into consideration. You also need to check the possibility of using the game in school, but also at home. We know that some commercial games are very beneficial for education, but they often take a very long time to play. So within the school lesson, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, how long is a secondary school lesson in Portugal on average? 1 hour, less than 1 hour? 90 minutes? Or less, or less. Okay, so that's rather long, actually. So in your situation, very good for games-based learning. In other countries where they're limited to less time, this could be problematic. So what you might be able to do is to explain the game and brief students within a lesson, and then as the homework, ask them to play for an hour and to do maybe an essay or some sort of writing up activity as a follow-up. Next, it's suggested that you check how many computers are needed to play the game. Is this an individual game? Is it a game that pupils can play in pairs? And indeed, if you need many computers, then do you have them in your classroom? Are they available at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning? And will everybody be there and not fighting over the computer to play? And of course, check if internet is available. If we're dealing with an online game, and even if you're not dealing with an online game, it's always good to have access to the internet for research purposes, so the students can have access to that. Finally, before we leave the selection of the game process, you need to check the game's rating standards. So this is something that people forget to do often. And what I mean by this is it's in terms of the age range the game is supposed to be for, and the content. So if you look actually in the handbook at the next pages, page 19, you should see here some content descriptors and rating labels from PEGI. Has anyone come across PEGI before? It stands for the Pan-European Gaming Information, and this is a label that many game developers now use to tell you what age range the game is suitable for and the content you will find within the game. So Ping is a fairly innocent game, since there is no sex or bad language, although there is a bit of love romance, it should be noticed. Sorry, I ruined the surprise. But of course the age range is it's made particularly for 14 to 18-year-olds, but this isn't strict. You can use it with younger or older students depending. In terms of content, you wouldn't find any of those on the Ping game because, as I said, it's a rather safe game. But if you decide to use a commercial game within the classroom, which I really would advise you to think about, within the Games and Schools report, there's a list of commercial games that have been used in classrooms. So you can hear teachers themselves tell you how they use a commercial game. So if you decide to do that, you just need to make sure that you check the rating standards before you do. Okay, so after selecting the game, you need to test the game. So this is really, really crucial. I can't stress enough how crucial, because it's not just enough to say, right, I've seen this game, it looks like it could possibly be useful in my lesson, and then just go there and use it, because without testing it, you don't know what you're up against. So the first step really would be to check if there is any accompanying material. So with Ping, you're rather lucky because you have this. Well, I don't know about lucky, but you have, in any case, a manual to help you should you so want to use it. But often games within the game itself include tutorials. So a training tutorial where you can actually just go through the steps and play yourself to get an idea of how it all works. So use these first. Then you should really consider the technical features of the game while you're testing it. So is the interface intuitive? You as a teacher, are you stuck when you're moving the mouse? Are you not really sure how the 3D environment works? because although it's likely your students are more aware of the gaming environment and will be less fazed by such an environment, there are a percentage of students that don't play games, as Jan noted as well, although I think it was something like 56% played regularly from the results you got. There were 14% that had never played a game. So not even just once or twice, but never. So we want to make sure we include those students so that by making sure the game has an intuitive feel to it, you can be sure to get them on board as well. An important question is, can the game be customized? So the pin game, for example, can be, if you think about customization in the sense that you can play it through different characters. This, of course, has the added value of probably being more attractive to both girls and boys because of the different sexes you can play it through. But this is also an aspect to consider when selecting the game. Next, very, very important, is to establish whether the time, the content, the skills in the game and the language used are appropriate. And this you will only know yourself from, depending on the age group you are teaching, and the content and skills you are dealing with. What subjects are we talking about? Is there content in there that is relevant to what you should be covering in that lesson at that time? If we then look at step 4, check if the game is suited to the curricular content and skills, which I just actually mentioned. Check how the game provides feedback. That's also very important because we know from research that what students find so motivating about games, in part, is the feedback they get. It's not like when you write a long essay that you take ages to do and you give it to the teacher and in 2 weeks' time you're able to understand where you went wrong, how well you did. With the game, you're instantly engaged because you know how you are progressing because the game gives you that feedback. So that's important. And check whether the game's software allows for assessment. Now, this isn't always the case, especially for games that are not made with learning purposes in mind. So the feedback is one type of assessment, if you like, but if you're thinking more about monitoring students' progress through the game, and more particularly finding out, identifying where students are having difficulties. Is there an area in the game they're not able to understand, and why is that? There are games with software that enable you to track their progress through the game. So look out for this also. Right, well, I thought after going through these steps, it would be nice for you to try and use them to assess a game. So I have an example of one game here, which is called the Third World Farmer game. So if you could now access this game yourselves, you can go to www.thirdworldfarmer, all one word, but the third is with a 3. So 3rd, worldfarmer.com. What I might do is put the URL in a way that you can see it. I will just add a... Oh, I was just going to put this here. Why is it invisible? Oh, okay. Maybe we can make this bigger somehow. Ooh. Is that visible? So you don't need, sorry, all the part at the back there. This is not necessary. Yeah, maybe Google it. Even better. I think I would. Yeah, you Googled it and found it. Excellent. Have people found the game? Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4. Excellent. Okay, great. So, we don't all have to look at the same game. This is just a suggestion because it's available online. But if you go to the handbook itself, on page 48, you will see this table of relevant games on poverty and other societal issues. And the ones that are available online, you can check out as well. So if anyone wants to look at a different game, please feel free to do that. And I'll leave this on the screen so you can start to go through the steps. So just give you 10 minutes now to look together, if you like, in pairs or on your own screen, to go through these questions and answer them in relation to the Third World Farmer game. Okay? So, and then you can feed back to me when you're done. So 10 minutes to assess this game. Please think about the game in terms of the subject you teach, the age group you teach, and follow the steps and answer those questions. Thank you. Not like... Yeah, we still have time, yeah. Oh, we have to listen first. So another game you might want to look at is Darfur is Dying, which is rather an interesting game. It's also available online for people who would like to look at a different... Is it rather slow? Okay, great. So this would answer one of the questions. It's slow to upload. So perhaps not great to use in a lesson if you don't have... Exactly. Everyone's probably logging in at the same time. So perhaps we could have someone... Would you mind volunteering to look at Darfur is Dying? This game here?
But now finally I have...
Oh, you're there. You're there. Great. If anyone else would like to, you can find the list of games on page 48. Is it the same in the Portuguese version? So you have the URLs there, so you can directly look there. Is it also 48? Ah, you're still loading. Okay. Yep. 49. Okay. Well,
no, it's 51.
51. So in the Portuguese version of the handbook, thank you, the table of the various games available is on page 51. Okay, anyone got it on their screen? Yeah? Okay. So what is the type of game? What game is this? Have you figured that out? I'm sorry? A simulation game? Yeah? What makes you think that?
Because I'm reading about
Ah!
and I'm trying to get some information about
Great.
the game to see if this could be useful for kids that are starting autonomously at home.
Okay, perfect. So you're looking for if they could use it at home?
And if they have enough information to sustain, because as an adult I need that.
Mm.
Perhaps if they want, they start gaming and they figure out how to. So, okay.
Absolutely, okay.
I'm going
So there was some information available?
Yes?
Yes?
Yes, and it has a description of the game, about the functions and how the type of the game.
Okay, so we've just been told that there's a description of this game. So that answers, when you test the game, looking at the accompanying materials. So there is some.
Yes.
Exactly, great, great. What else do we know? What are the technical requirements of this game? Is it online? Is it only online?
Only on.
I can't hear you, sorry.
It's only online.
Only online. Okay, so this would be something to consider. Perhaps if you don't have internet access, for example, or you're worried about slow connection, this might not be a good game for your class.
It doesn't have any game rating standards.
No game rating standards. Okay, so this... I'm sorry?
I cannot find them.
Okay. They're not immediately visible. Okay, so no game rating standards. What do we do in this case? Do we use it? Do we not? What would you do?
Test and then see by myself if it was good enough for the question.
I can
Only way, right, to test it. Excellent. I think that's the fairest way. Rather than disregard the game completely, play it yourself, because in any case you need to do that before you use it with your students, and see yourself whether it's appropriate.
Use common sense.
Common sense. The best tool the teacher has, common sense, absolutely. And of course, most of this is commonsensical. I mean, it's really basic, step by step, but really to ensure that teachers feel comfortable with a new media like games. Okay, great. Any other questions we haven't covered? How many computers are needed to play the game? Is it a game that can be played in groups or only individually? Is this information available? Can you understand from the game? It seems individual, okay? Okay, so for example, if the game does seem to be one that you can play individually, rather than have a whole lesson where children are playing on their own, you could perhaps break this up with some group work and group discussion to make sure there is a variety of modes of learning. And I think that basically covers most of the points. What about feedback and assessment? Does the game allow for that? What kind of feedback do you get? Perhaps you would need longer to... Yeah? Okay, so these final points, point 5 and 6, you would need to really play the game to find out how feedback is given and the possibilities for assessment. Okay, great. So, that completes the first part of what I wanted to talk about in the handbook. And after lunch, we're going to look at the last section of the handbook, which is section 5, about the curricular content and the activities. But I thought before we did that, it would be nice to know who we have in the room. So we have about 10 minutes before lunch, I think? Yeah, exactly. So before we move this afternoon onto actually playing the game and trying to figure out how you would integrate it in your lessons, I know we have a mixture of people here today from different backgrounds, so it would be good to understand where you're from. So perhaps you could raise your hand if you're a teacher. Do we have actual teachers? Okay, great. So majority of you are teachers, and all at secondary level, I presume? Not all secondary level. Aha. Secondary level. Okay. So the majority from secondary. Anyone from primary education?
Are you considered 5th grade and 6th grade?
Well, if you give me the age group, I can tell you.
Oh, well, 9 to 11.
Okay, so you're still primary. Yeah, I would consider maybe 11 upwards as secondary.
Primary.
So primary as well. Okay, so that's interesting because the handbook was really created with more of a secondary level age group in mind, but perhaps you could tell us this afternoon a little bit about whether some of the activities would be eventually relevant to younger groups of students. And anybody from higher education, slightly older groups, maybe even 16 to 18? Yes, high level of secondary education. Can you speak up a little?
19 years.
19 years, okay, so that's the upper end. Yeah? The same also. Okay, great. So this would be good because there are some activities in the handbook that try to deal with slightly what I would call reflexive activities which could be relevant to this group. But I would very much appreciate your feedback about that. Okay, what about teacher trainers? Do we have anyone training teachers? Yes. Teresa has one of them, like this.
I'm a teacher trainer, I'm a technician, I'm all of them.
Wow, okay. You also train teachers, yeah. Okay, so some of you have a double hat. So you teach and you train. Okay, so that's a great position to be in. And I believe there are people also from community centres, am I right? People working outside of school. Oh, thank you. We have simultaneous translation here, which is fantastic. Let me see again, sorry. Okay, so quite a few people from community centres. Now this I know nothing about, I'm afraid. It's completely outside of the context I'm used to working in. So perhaps someone could tell us a bit about the community centre, just briefly, what it is, who you work with, who are your target groups? Yes, please.
We work with a big range of kids between, for example, in my community center, between 6 and the age
sorry, I didn't catch the second one. With the internet, you said? Okay. Okay, and this happens after school hours in the late afternoon, or? Mm-hmm. Also in the weekends. Okay. Okay, so someone else dealing with the younger age range. And is it disadvantaged pupils that are actually in these centres, or do you have a mix? Pupils to compare their situation to Sophia and Jim's situation. So these are issues that need to be dealt with carefully. Okay, is there anyone I've missed in the room? We have teachers, we have teacher trainers, we have people working in community centres. Anybody not accounted for? IT, I heard someone say IT.
We still have our ICT members that are mostly technicians that work with us.
Okay, so we have technicians as well. ICT coordinating, oh wow.
Several hands.
Several, brilliant. And so you have 3 or 4. Okay, great. So that I presume also means that you're privileged in one sense because you're not afraid of ICT. In that sense, you're used to using digital tools for your lessons. Does anybody actually teach ICT as a subject? Okay, so we have people that are actually directly teaching technology. So, in a way, I'm preaching to the converted in the sense that you're already convinced of ICT's usefulness, but you have to act as role models. This is what I wanted to say, that the idea of today really is to give you the confidence to use Ping, but also to spread the word to other teachers in your community, in your schools, to feel they can use this game, and that you don't have to be an ICT expert. Ping is very intuitive. The handbook is written in a language that most people find quite user-friendly, so we hope that it will be used as much as possible. So I suggest we break for lunch now, and after the lunch break we will come back and work in small groups. I will give you a small introduction to the curricular aspects of Ping and the learning outcomes available in the handbook, and then we will do some practical work together. Okay, so thank you. Okay, so inviting external experts.
So we do that.
Yep.
We do things like health. So we looked at all the disciplines that concern with health, and sciences is one of them. It's really because of the historical perspective of the things that happen in all countries. What is common in the countries that experience poverty in the global way and in the personal level.
Absolutely.
Because all things get together. The language, so the English and the French, because they could make contact with other schools that are working with Ping, or with
exactly,
other,
and they could play the game in different languages. Yes.
Share what the experience and the difference in Europe, the difference, because we do that with Ping and with other projects. So it's kind of easy to put all the disciplines inside this.
Okay, so we hear now firsthand from a teacher working with civic education, with pupils with special needs, how volunteering and the activities in Cluster 2 about experiencing poverty, this one here, could be used in this curricular context, in the Portuguese curriculum. So this is excellent. This is a very good example. What about Cluster 3, which looks more at media studies, about games, ICT, the game as a cultural phenomena, and how it can be used to raise awareness? Did anybody look at the activities in this more content? No time. No time, but of course you have the handbook. Yeah, this is your interest as ICT coordinator as well. So you have time, of course, to go and read each of the activities in more detail. And of course, to mix the subjects. This is just suggestions. But obviously, because of the multidisciplinary approach to Ping, you can swap and use it in various ways. Okay, so thank you for sharing some insights you had. It looked like you had very interesting discussions. So just to conclude, the next steps. DGIDC here at the Ministry have very usefully created a Moodle area where you can learn more about Ping and exchange amongst one another about your experiences of using the game in schools. So I strongly encourage you to take part in the Moodle module, which for the moment is open to all ICT Centre competent teachers, but will be made accessible to everybody here today. Already has been. Excellent. Since lunchtime, Teresa has already made this accessible to all teachers, so that's fantastic. So please join and take part in the debate. You can record your experiences with using Ping, how it has been successful, but also the problems you have faced. Perhaps other teachers can suggest solutions to the problems you are faced with. Next, it just leaves me to say good luck with the pilot phase of using Ping. I wish you the very best of luck. I know that most of you will be involved in the pilot phase of the project. And for you to know that Portugal really is leading the way in this area, because you're the first country, apart from Belgium, where the game was developed, to really generalize the use of Ping. You're the first teachers to be trained in the use of Ping. And so we really look to you to be the role models, not only for other Portuguese teachers, which is of course very important, but to be the role models for other teachers in Europe. So you have a very important role to play. So don't be scared by this, be happy and confident, and we wish you the best of luck as catalysts of this exciting project. For further information, please do feel free to email me at my address at European Schoolnet. And of course, this is the link to the game, where you also have the toolkit you can download and have other information. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
I would like to thank you, Caroline. It was really a quite intense experience. It was great. And of course, Jan, with all the technical support. I must address some questions. I will try it in Portuguese. Eu queria agradecer a todos por terem estado presentes. Foi realmente, de facto, acho que uma experiência muito intensa e muito diversificada, porque estão aqui, de facto, não só os professores das áreas que nós tínhamos pensado serem as mais apropriadas, como formadores e os monitores do programa de escolhas, que foram excelentes, obrigadíssimos por terem participado. A disciplina, de facto, já está acessível a visitantes a partir do nosso Moodle. Eu vou acrescentar lá a notícia que nós publicámos no página da ERTE. Mas durante a próxima semana, como eu tenho, no fundo, agora uma base de dados, a vossa base de dados, as pessoas que aqui estiveram presentes, eu vou contactar-vos nós vamos contactar-vos por e-mail e mandar-vos o link para o Moodle, onde vão estar disponíveis quer a comunicação do Milhares de Manhã, quer esta comunicação, e que eu penso que depois vão ser ótimas ajudas também para quando, em setembro, tornarmos a fazer pequenos, pelo menos é essa a nossa intenção, pequenas sessões para mais professores. O espaço do Moodle, além de funcionar como centro de recurso, era um bocadinho aquilo que a Caroline estava a dizer, será um espaço de partilha. Uma das coisas que eu fui observando, e eu queria muito agradecer-vos por isto, que no fundo fazer um piloto também serve para estas coisas, foram todas as sugestões e críticas que eu fui recolhendo. Se tiverem mais, enviem para nós na ERTE, porque eu acho que no fundo quem está a começar com o programa, quem está a testar o programa, é que se percebe destes pequenos pormenores, e isso para uma segunda versão do PIN ou do manual vai ser excelente. E agradeço imenso, de facto, essa visão e essa perspectiva. Obrigada. E desejo toda a boa viagem. Obrigada.